The mud comes first. Thick, cold, and unyielding. It seeps into boots, gloves, and every fold of uniform. It clings to rifles and the edges of helmets, dragging soldiers down even before the first shell lands. Somewhere beyond the craters, the wire stretches endlessly, taut and waiting, while rats scurry through the waterlogged trenches, unafraid of the men above. The smell is iron and rot, a constant presence that no march or rest can shake. Silence presses hard against your ears, broken only by the distant, metallic cough of artillery. The men are 17, 19, barely 20. Eyes hollow, faces streaked with grime, they move mechanically, leaning over the parapet to peer into no man's land. You can see their hesitation, the small tremor in hands that clutch rifles, each waiting for the inevitable. Shells scream overhead, striking earth and wood alike, shaking the walls, the ground, the very air. Each step outside the trench feels like surrendering a part of yourself to the mud, the bullets, the gas that hangs low like fog in the morning. By night, the trenches flood with cold water and despair. Lice burrow, disease spreads unseen, and the wounded moan through the long hours, some whispering last messages into the night. Letters from home are damp, smeared with rain, and barely read. Each dawn brings the same landscape. Churned mud, barbed wire, shattered trees, the ghosts of men who vanished into craters or were swallowed by the relentless earth. Survival is a whisper, fleeting and fragile, a matter of inches and luck rather than courage. So tonight, turn down the lights and listen closely. Imagine standing ankle-deep in mud, the guns screaming in your ears, rain washing over faces that have known too much. Subscribe and stay with me. Tell me where you're watching from, and remember the young souls who endured what most could not even imagine. The trenches were more than war. They were a trial of endurance, a theatre of inevitability, and a quiet testament to human fragility. The mud comes first. It waits long before the guns, long before the officers' whistles cut through the fog. It presses into boots, seeping past soles, crawling up the seams of uniforms, thick and unyielding like the hands of the earth itself reaching to claim the living. Even before the first shell lands, the soldiers feel it, a slow, silent weight that pulls at ankles and knees, makes every step an effort of endurance. The walls of the trench, once solid and proud in their construction, sag under the relentless damp, streaked with mud that drips from wooden supports and the jagged edges of sandbags. It smells of iron, of earth rotting under wet skies, of the faint tang of something dead beneath. Somewhere in the mud, rats scuttle, unafraid of the men whose boots crush the soil around them, whose hands dig into the walls, pressing their faces against the wet clay to peer into no man's land. The trench stretches, narrow and winding, a serpentine, wound carved into the earth. At 17, you have seen little of the world outside your village, little of life beyond the green fields of your childhood. Yet here, the air tastes of fear, of smoke and cold metal, and the faint, lingering sweetness of the sea carried inland by the wind. You watch the men around you, faces streaked with grime, eyes wide and unblinking, hands trembling slightly on rifles that feel heavier by the day. They shift their weight, shuffle boots that already bear the weight of mud and water, and glance toward the horizon where the sun struggles to pierce a sky thick with clouds and the promise of rain. A rat darts along the edge of the trench, tiny claws clicking on wet wood. It pauses, sniffing, as if it knows that death walks among the men in a different form. You do not flinch, though a shiver travels down your spine. Survival, you learn quickly, is less about fear than about endurance. Breath comes in short, shallow bursts, not from exertion, but from the tension of anticipation, the slow, gnawing certainty that every step outside the trench might be your last. Somewhere ahead, the wire stretches taut, barbed and waiting, a cruel maze over churned earth that seems to mock your very presence. Soldiers whisper, barely audible above the sighing of the wind, their voices carrying questions with no answers, stories of the men who arrived yesterday and did not leave, whose boots remain propped against the walls as reminders. Night falls slowly, dragging shadows over the trench. Mud glimmers under the faint light of lanterns swaying in the damp breeze. Water collects in shallow pools, reflecting pale faces that look almost ghostly in the dim glow. Sleep comes reluctantly, and even then, only in brief, fitful bursts. In the hours between breaths, in the moments when the artillery is quiet and the wind presses against the walls, you feel it, the weight of everything that surrounds you. The knowledge that the earth itself conspires to swallow the living. A letter from home rests folded in your pocket, damp at the edges, the words almost illegible. It speaks of normality and safety that seem as distant as the stars above the clouded sky. By the time dawn approaches, you are already soaked, chilled to the bone, and coated in mud that has become part of your uniform, part of your body. The trench is no longer a shelter, but a living entity, pressing against you from every side, whispering that the world beyond it is a place where few survive. And yet, the mud does not care. It waits, patient and inevitable, as it has for years and will for years to come, claiming the young, the unready, the unlucky. In the trenches of this war, to move, to breathe, to hope, all are acts of defiance against a ground that never sleeps. The wire comes second, barbed, coiled, and endless. It stretches across no man's land like a slumbering predator, taut with quiet menace. It is not merely steel, it is intention made visible, a lattice of sharp teeth that promises pain, blood, and immobilization to any who dare step too close. From the trench, it looks innocuous at first, bending in the morning fog, glinting faintly when a shaft of pale sun pierces the clouded sky. But every man knows its reality. The wire is patient, unyielding, indifferent to the cries of the wounded or the prayers of the living. It waits, silently, across churned earth that reeks of gunpowder, blood, and decay. A reminder that the line between survival and death is measured in inches and chance. You peer over the parapet, fingers tightening on the rifle that feels impossibly heavy, coated as it is in mud and grime. The barbs glint in the dim light, cruel little crescents of steel designed to tear flesh with minimal effort. Between the coils lie the bodies of those who underestimated it, their uniforms shredded, boots caught, eyes wide, in the last expression of shock before the earth claimed them. Rats move among them, indifferent to rank, age, or courage, gnawing with a rhythm as old as the soil itself. The mud softens beneath your feet, threatening to swallow your weight, to pull you into its cold embrace before the wire itself even finds you. Each step forward is a negotiation with inevitability, a test of luck as much as skill. The morning is damp, a mist pressing against the trench walls, curling around the helmets and rifles like invisible fingers. You hear the faint scrape of wire against earth as it settles in the breeze, a subtle, sinister whisper that hints at the pain it has delivered and the pain it will deliver again. Officers shout orders, but their voices barely penetrate the fog. Commands are swallowed almost as quickly as they leave the lips. A corporal points toward a gap, a faint irregularity in the wire, a small hope in a landscape designed to crush hope. Men glance at one another, weighing the risk, counting the moments, knowing full well that the wire does not forgive hesitation. At night, the wire becomes more than steel, it becomes shadow. Under dim lanterns and the weak light of a crescent moon, it transforms into a writhing maze, every coil a potential death trap. Soldiers moving along its edges must negotiate each step carefully, listening to the groan of stretched metal and the soft sucking of mud, knowing that a single misstep could tear flesh, rip clothing, and end life in an instant. Those who have crossed it carry the memory like a scar, silent warnings etched in their hands and eyes, bodies that twitch unconsciously from past shocks. You consider the men who went before, those who learned too late that courage cannot undo inevitability. Their letters, soaked and smeared, tell only fragments. Words half written before they fell. Promises unfulfilled, names scratched in mud and stone. Each story is a reminder that the wire waits for no one, that preparation and bravery only delay the inevitable. It is both guardian and executioner. a line drawn in earth and iron where hope is measured against survival. By the end of the day, you understand the lesson. The wire is more than an obstacle. It is a teacher, cruel and uncompromising, shaping every movement, every breath, every calculation. You will live or die within inches of it, under its patient gaze, and as night falls, the mist thickens, the mud softens, and the wire gleams faintly in the lantern light, a constant, silent promise that survival in these trenches is always provisional, always fragile, and often impossible. The smell comes next, creeping into lungs before the eyes fully register the devastation around them. It is iron and smoke, thick and persistent, clinging to every fold of clothing, every strand of hair, every pore of skin. The tang of blood lingers in the mud, mixed with the acrid bite of cordite and the faint, lingering sweetness of earth churned by shells. Even before stepping fully into the open, before seeing the barbed wire or the shattered bodies, the scent tells the story of the battlefield. It is a prelude, a warning, and a reminder that the world here is different from the world left behind. It presses against the chest, filling the throat with heaviness, and leaves no doubt that life in these trenches is measured in breaths as much as in days. You inhale cautiously, trying to distinguish between what is mud, what is metal, what is the lingering echo of someone's last moments. But the smell is total, overwhelming, and absolute. It drifts from the distant craters, from the bodies half buried in churned earth, from the fire that crackles in the debris of collapsed trenches. It is not just the scent of war, it is the scent of inevitability, a constant companion that reminds every man of the fragility of flesh and the unyielding permanence of death. Movement is slow, deliberate. Every footstep sends wet clay squelching beneath boots, releasing new bursts of the iron-scented air. The mud clings to everything, and the smell becomes intertwined with it, an inseparable part of the soldier's existence. You glance at your comrades, faces pale, eyes wide, noses pinched against the invisible cloud, but there is no escaping it. Some cough, some gag, but all inhale anyway, because to breathe is to live, even when the very air seems designed to weaken you. The smoke rises in lazy tendrils from distant explosions, curling in patterns that look almost deliberate, as though the sky itself were mocking the men below. It carries the scent of burning wood, shredded, canvas, and scorched earth, layering itself over the iron and mud. The combination is hypnotic in its constancy. You feel it coating your throat, searing lungs with each deep breath, leaving a taste that is at once metallic and bitter. It seeps into uniforms, into the small rations of clothing that are never enough to protect from the rain, the cold, the mud, or the stench. Somewhere close by, a shell hits, and the smoke momentarily thickens, swirling into spirals that catch the faint light of dawn. The smell intensifies, sharper, almost tangible. Men flinch, instinctively ducking behind sandbags and the uneven walls of the trench. But it is impossible to hide entirely. Even covered, even crouched, even when the body trembles with cold or fear, the smell finds its way into every pore, reminding you that you are not alone here. Death is, and it is patient. By evening, the trenches have become a living entity of their own making, heavy with the sense of human presence and human failure. Mud, iron, smoke, and blood intermingle until it is impossible to separate one from the other, as if the ground itself is breathing, observing, remembering. Soldiers cannot wash it off. They cannot escape it. It becomes part of them, seeping into memory, into every shiver of exhaustion, into every heartbeat that continues against the odds. And in that moment, you understand. The smell is a teacher, like the mud and the wire before it. It tells the truth that no officer, no letter from home, no plan can change. Survival is provisional, rare, and fleeting. The trenches of the Great War do not merely threaten life, they engulf it, suffocating hope with every inhalation, every breath, until the air itself is as much an enemy as the enemy across the wire. The boots come before the men, or perhaps they remain long after. Dark leather, caked with mud, frayed at the seams, standing stiffly upright in the trenches, or half buried in the churned earth of no man's land. They are markers, warnings, relics of lives snatched away before their story could unfold. You notice them first in the corners of your vision. A pair of boots abandoned near a collapsed sandbag, the laces tangled in wet clay, soles worn smooth from steps, never meant to carry them this far. They speak without sound, telling tales of fear, courage, hesitation, and inevitability. Every man in the trench glances at them with a quiet, unspoken dread, knowing that those boots once held flesh, fingers, eyes, a heart now silenced forever. The mud surrounds them like a river, pulling at each shape, hiding the horrors beneath while revealing enough to haunt the mind. You see the scuff marks, the uneven wear, the faint trace of a name written inside the tongue of leather, a small, human defiance that the war will erase in time. Soldiers pass by, boots squelching against the trench floor, barely noticing the abandoned pairs except in fleeting, instinctive glances. But for you, they are reminders that survival is a chance taken step by step, that even the simplest movement carries risk, and that the earth itself does not release what it has claimed. In the early hours, the rain falls lightly, a mist that soaks through uniform and mud alike. The boots glisten with water and grime, almost as if they are alive, standing watch over the trenches as silent sentinels. You crouch near the edge of the parapet, careful not to slip, and your eyes trace the line of boots left behind, some leaning against walls, others sprawled unnaturally in the mud. Every pair has a story you will never hear, a life cut short, a brother, son, or friend lost to a world that does not pause for grief. The smell of iron and smoke mingles with the wet leather, a pungent reminder that death has already passed through these trenches more times than anyone can count. Night descends slowly, drawing long shadows across the trench walls and making the abandoned boots seem like spectres. The wind presses against the wooden supports, whistling faintly, and in the darkness the boots appear to move subtly, shifting with the sigh of the trench itself. Rats scuttle across them, leaving tiny marks, gnawing at what remains, while the men huddle against walls, rifles close, bodies trembling from cold and anticipation. The boots are patient, unwavering, eternal in their testimony. They outlast letters, orders, and prayers, enduring as mute witnesses to every failure, every hesitation, every misstep. You think of the young men who wore those boots, whose laughter once filled their homes, whose letters spoke of mundane fears and distant hopes. They are gone, and the boots remain as monuments to lives extinguished with brutal efficiency. Each step you take feels measured against them. A reminder that to move is to risk, to breathe is to challenge fate, to live is to defy inevitability for just a few fleeting moments. By dawn, the trench seems heavier, the mud deeper, the air thicker, and the boots stand resolute, waiting for the next to join them, teaching a lesson no one wants, but every soldier must learn, that survival is a fragile, fleeting privilege in a world designed to claim the living as easily as the fallen. The orders come not with clarity, but as whispers that drift through the trenches, carried on the damp, cold air like smoke curling from a distant fire. They are spoken by officers whose faces are pale and strained, whose voices tremble with fatigue, yet must appear certain. Even as they call commands, their words seem to dissolve in the fog, swallowed by the sound of water dripping from sandbags, by the scrape of boots through mud, by the faint moans of men already wounded and waiting. You hear them half by chance, fragments of sentences, syllables that flicker and die before reaching the ears of all but the closest listeners. Yet even in their uncertainty, they carry the weight of life and death, of movement and stasis, of action that may save or condemn. You press closer to the trench wall, the rifle resting heavily against your shoulder, the mud seeping into every seam of your uniform. The whisper passes by, seemingly meant for someone else, yet it affects you all the same. You understand, without words, that the commands are less about guidance than ritual to impose order on a chaos that refuses to be organized. The words are a thin shield against the inevitability of artillery, of barbed wire, of mud sucking at your boots. Every man obeys, not out of certainty, but because obedience, however futile, feels like a tether to survival. Around you, other soldiers strain to catch the message. Some repeat it quietly to their neighbors, their voices hesitant, unsure, but each repetition dilutes the meaning. A corporal gestures wildly, pointing to a distant line, his face ghosted with exhaustion, shouting a phrase that seems to bend under the fog, fading before it reaches the next trench. It does not matter. You move because you must, because the command is there, because the world beyond the parapet waits, indifferent to hesitation. The mud clings to your knees as you inch forward, the weight of the rifle pressing against your chest. The whisper follows. You. A constant vibration in the air, a reminder that the men giving orders are as trapped as those receiving them. No one fully understands, yet everyone complies, performing a dangerous ballet choreographed by uncertainty. The whistle of an approaching shell interrupts the rhythm, and the whisper is gone, replaced by the shriek of metal, the thud of impact, the tremor running through the earth. At night, the orders return as fragments of memory. You recall phrases half-heard, instructions poorly understood, warnings whispered in haste, and each recalls the fragility of life in the trenches. Some men pace the mud, rehearsing commands they barely remember, trying to anchor themselves against the relentless tide of noise, cold, and death. Others huddle in corners, shivering, repeating silent prayers alongside the fractured words. The whisper of orders becomes a ghostly companion, less a guide than a reminder that the trench itself offers no certainty, no mercy, no pause. By dawn, the UVA fog lifts slightly, revealing the trenches soaked in water and littered with evidence of the night's trials. You realize that survival here is not a matter of bravery or skill, but of attentiveness to whispers and shadows, to movement and hesitation, to the subtle cues that separate the living from the dead. The orders, whispered and incomplete, are part of that rhythm, part of the ritual of endurance. You obey because to hesitate is to invite the mud, the wire, and the guns to take what they will, and because in the trenches of the Great War, certainty is a luxury no man can afford. The silence comes first. It is not an absence of sound, but a presence that presses against the walls of the trench, seeping into ears, muscles, and the spaces between thoughts. It settles over the soldiers like a damp cloak, heavy and suffocating, carrying with it the weight of anticipation, fear, and inevitability. Every footstep, every rustle of cloth, every shallow breath seems amplified in the stillness, echoing off mud-slicked walls as if the earth itself were listening. You sit crouched in the trench, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the dark horizon, where the faintest hint of dawn struggles against clouds thick with rain and smoke. The silence is both companion and predator, whispering reminders of what waits beyond the parapet. Around you, men shift quietly, their movements cautious, mechanical. Fingers tremble slightly on rifles, hands brushing against the mud-slicked walls for balance. The wind presses against the trench, a soft, insistent push that carries the smell of wet, earth and iron, yet makes no sound beyond the faintest sigh. Somewhere distant, a bird calls, its song weak and unpracticed, drowned immediately by the overwhelming stillness. Even the rats, usually bold and brazen, scuttle with hesitation, as if the silence demands respect. In moments like this, you understand the depth of the world you have entered. Every noise, every motion, every breath is measured against a quiet that never truly releases its grip. The silence before dawn carries memories of the fallen. You see them in the spaces between the mud-caked sandbags, in the faint outline of boots left upright where men once stood, in the whispers of wind through barbed wire that seems to hold echoes of past screams. Every soldier knows it is a pause not meant for rest, but for reckoning, a prelude to the chaos that will inevitably arrive with light. You press your hands into the mud at your knees, feeling its cold bite through your gloves, and imagine the moments ahead. The first has done its work. The soldiers are awake, poised, and aware of their vulnerability in a way that the noise of battle never allows. The trench is a living, breathing entity. Every wall, every puddle, every coil of wire soaked in tension. a testament to the impossibility of survival, and you realize, as the light rises, that the silence was not empty. It was a lesson in endurance, in fear, in the fragile balance between life and the inevitability of death. In the trenches of the Great War, silence is not peace. Silence is preparation. Silence is waiting. The rats come next, uninvited yet undeniably present, moving with the certainty of predators in the wet, narrow trenches. They are everywhere, darting across sandbags, slipping between wooden planks, skittering along the edges of waterlogged earth. Their claws click against wood and mud, a staccato rhythm that becomes a soundtrack to every anxious heartbeat. They are fearless, accustomed to the chaos of shells, bullets, and blood, thriving where men struggle simply to remain upright. You watch them with a mixture of fascination and revulsion, knowing that these creatures survive here with an ease that soldiers cannot hope to match. In this world, the rats are masters of the trenches, and humans, however trained, are merely intruders. Crouched against the damp wall, you see one slip past the boots of a sleeping comrade, its small body flexible, agile, utterly indifferent to the rifle pressed close. Another scrabbles along a sandbag, pausing to sniff at a discarded ration before darting off into a dark corner where the mud has pooled like a black mirror. They are omnipresent, moving in shadows and light, often unnoticed until the sharp edge of instinct, teeth, claws, sudden motion reminds you that the trench is not a human space. They feed on what is left behind, scraps of bread, the occasional discarded uniform, and, sometimes, the soft remains of men who were not fast enough, lucky enough, or careful enough to avoid death's hand. The rats do not fear the guns. They are indifferent to the explosions that shake the earth, indifferent to the screams that punctuate the night, indifferent to the men who try desperately to keep the mud from swallowing them. You see them gnawing on pieces of canvas, dragging what they can into hidden burrows, and realize that the order of survival is inverted. The creatures thrive, while humans cling to a fragile existence, measured in hours, steps, and shallow breaths. The soldiers whisper warnings to one another, shivering, but the rats do not heed whispers. They move according to a logic older than war itself, a rhythm that mocks every command shouted over the mud and smoke. Night brings no relief. The trenches fill with the sound of scraping claws over soaked wood, the tiny, relentless patter of movement along the walls. Sleep becomes impossible for many. Exhaustion offers only the illusion of respite before the small, incessant sounds awaken memory and fear. You feel them brush against your boots, sometimes your hands, and fight the shiver that travels up your spine. The mud and water make footing uncertain, and the rats exploit every hesitation. They are opportunists, patient and constant, a reminder that in the trenches, life is never wholly your own. By dawn, you have adjusted, in the smallest ways, to their presence, though unease never fully departs. You understand that survival is not measured in heroism or bravery alone, but in awareness, noticing the patterns, anticipating the movements, navigating a world where the smallest creatures are as deadly as the largest weapons. The rats, like the mud, the wire, and the smoke, become teachers. They remind every man in the trench that the battlefield is indiscriminate, that danger lurks not only in enemy fire, but in the earth itself, and that survival is provisional, fleeting, and always uncertain. In the quiet moments, as they scuttle past and disappear into the shadows, you realize that these creatures, unthinking and tireless, understand the trenches in ways you never will, and that is another reason why living here is nearly impossible. The first letter comes wrapped in the ordinary, the way normal life tries desperately to reach you even here, in the mud and wire of the trenches. Its edges are damp, softened by rain that has crept through the envelope, the ink blurred where tears or moisture have found their way in. You hold it with a cautious reverence, afraid to unfold the thin paper too quickly, afraid that the words themselves might somehow betray you to the world beyond, or reveal that your existence is precarious, dangling by a thread in the trenches of war. Even as you break the seal, the smell of earth, iron, and smoke clings to the paper, a stark reminder that home and battlefield are separated not just by distance, but by an almost insurmountable wall of danger. The handwriting is familiar: your mother, your father, your sweetheart, names that once meant comfort, now carrying weight you cannot fully bear. Each line is folded with care, each word deliberate, yet the letter cannot capture what has already begun to erode inside you. The exhaustion, the cold that gnaws at bones, the mud that never releases its hold, the constant pressure of the wire, the smoke, the rats, the silence, and the smell of iron that never fades. The sentences describe markets, family gatherings, church services, the small monotony of civilian life, and you read them with a mixture of longing and guilt. Every word is a reminder of the world that continues without you, a world where steps are taken without caution, where mud does not drag at ankles, where bullets and shells are not counted among daily hazards. You fold the letter carefully, pressing it against your chest, and for a moment the world beyond seems to reach into the trench. But the illusion is fleeting. The mud clings to your boots, water seeps into every fold of uniform. Distant artillery reminds you that the letter is a fragile tether to a life that feels increasingly unreal. You glance at your comrades, some reading similar scraps of connection, some staring at the damp earth as if the letter had never arrived at all. Each of them carries their own piece of home, but all understand the same truth. The world that produced these letters exists in parallel, unattainable, and almost cruel in its normalcy. Night falls, and you lay the letter beside you, careful not to let the dampness claim it. You wonder if it will survive the night, if it will still bear the smell of ink and paper in the morning, or if the mud, the rain, and the chaos of artillery will reduce it to nothing more than pulp and memories. The words themselves seem fragile in the trenches, easily overshadowed by the screams, the shouts, the groans of the wounded, and the constant, unrelenting presence of death. Yet even in their fragility, they serve a purpose. They remind you that survival is not only measured in distance from the enemy or the depth of the trench, but in connection to what remains human outside this war. By dawn, the letter rests against your chest, like a silent companion. You have read it again and again, memorizing phrases, clutching names that cannot intervene in the mud or the wire. Its presence is both comfort and torment, a reminder that the trenches are not just physical barriers but psychological prisons, and that surviving them is not only about skill, courage, or chance. It is about holding on to the fragile pieces of home, while the world itself conspires to strip them away. In these trenches, even letters are lessons. Survival is fleeting, connection is ephemeral, and life is never fully secure. The tremor comes before thought. It begins deep in the muscles, subtle at first, a faint vibration that no one notices until it becomes impossible to ignore. Fingers tighten on rifles, palms slick with mud and sweat, hands pressed against wooden supports that wobble under the weight of fatigue and cold. You see it in the men around you, the barely perceptible quiver of knuckles, the slight shake in shoulders, the tremor that betrays youth and inexperience. Most are barely out of boyhood, faces pale and drawn, eyes wide in the half-light, trying to reconcile the world they imagined with the hell into which they have been thrust. Even those who have fought before cannot fully mask it. Experience dulls fear, but does not erase the body's response to relentless, unyielding danger. The tremor grows with anticipation. You crouch in the trench, hands wrapped around the rifle's stock, feeling the cold seep into your skin, turning it numb in some places and painfully sensitive in others. Every distant boom of artillery, every whistle of wind carrying the faint echo of an incoming shell, sends it shivering through your bones. The mud beneath your knees shifts slightly as a rat scuttles past, and the tremor responds in kind, an involuntary acknowledgement of the fragility of your hold on life. Young men glance at one another, seeking reassurance in faces that show equal uncertainty, but each knows there is no comfort here, only the shared understanding that survival is fleeting and that the tremor is both a warning and a symptom of reality. Night brings little relief. The cold penetrates through layers of uniform, finding cracks in gloves and cuffs, wrapping fingers in ice that seems to pulse with every heartbeat. The trembling becomes rhythmic, synced with the distant cadence of explosions and the creak of trench walls settling under weight and water. Some men clutch at their rifles, as if doing so might steady more than just the weapon, as if sheer will could anchor, become a companion, a constant presence that reminds every soldier of fragility and mortality. It is an unspoken acknowledgement of the impossibility of certainty in these trenches. Each heartbeat, each inhalation, each cautious step is punctuated by its reminder. Survival is measured in small increments, in fractions of seconds and inches of mud, in reflexes sharpened by fear and repetition. The tremor in young hands teaches what no manual can. The body itself becomes a battlefield, nerves and muscles as contested as any stretch of earth, wire, or mud. And, in its quiet, persistent way, it proves the impossible truth. In the trenches of the Great War, to endure is to feel the war within you, in every fibre of your trembling body. The long night comes slowly, stretching its fingers across the trenches with a weight that is both physical and invisible. Darkness presses against every wall, pooling in the corners where water gathers, seeping into mud and sandbags alike. The faint glow of lanterns sways gently, struggling against the blackness, casting shadows that stretch and twist across the faces of soldiers hunched against the trench walls. Every sound is amplified, the distant rumble of artillery, the soft scrape of a boot against mud, the faint, mournful sigh of wind threading through barbed wire. Time seems suspended in this night, each second dragged out, heavy with anticipation, dread, and the unspoken understanding that the world beyond the trench will not wait for the living. You sit crouched, rifle resting across your knees, hands stiff and numb from cold and tension. Around you, comrades shift quietly, trying to find comfort in the impossibility of rest. Some attempt sleep, curling into themselves, letting exhaustion take what it can, only to be awakened by the tremor of the earth under a distant shell. The soft whisper of mud sliding against the walls, the faint scratching of rats that have become as familiar as the dirt they cling to. Every movement carries a calculated weight too sudden, and you risk attention, too slow, and you risk losing the rhythm that keeps you alive. The night teaches patience, but also fear. Patience without hope, fear without distraction. Letters from home lie folded and damp in pockets, faintly scented with ink and paper, a fragile reminder of a world that feels impossibly distant. You read them quietly, memorizing the words, tracing the loops of familiar handwriting, imagining warmth and comfort that seem almost unreal. For a moment, the trench feels less like a tomb and more like a fragile barrier between life and what waits beyond. Yet the illusion fades with every distant explosion, every soft groan of the wounded, every scrape of metal against mud. The long night is relentless, unyielding, and indifferent, eroding hope slowly, like water gnawing at stone. Rations are minimal, bread hard and dry, water stagnant in tin cups, but they are shared quietly, ritualistically, as if the act of consumption can stave off the cold and the fear. Conversation is rare, whispers that barely rise above the low hum of night, and even laughter, when it comes, is hollow, more an attempt to distract than an expression of joy. The men sit or lie in mud that has soaked through layers of clothing, listening to the trench breathe with them, listening to the earth itself, aware that every tremor of sound could herald the next disaster. The rats scurry, the mud shifts, and the silence of death hovers close, always present, a companion as real as any living comrade. As dawn approaches, the long night loosens its grip, but not its lesson. Fatigue presses into muscles, bones ache from hours of crouching, and the mind struggles to remain alert while every nerve is on edge. You understand, as you adjust your gloves and rifle, that the night was not merely a pause, but a test of endurance, a trial of patience, a reminder that survival is measured not only in steps taken or bullets dodged, but in the ability to persist through hours of stillness, terror, and unrelenting observation. In the trenches of the Great War, the long night teaches what the mud, the wire, and the guns cannot. That endurance is quiet, internal, and often invisible, and that to survive is to endure not only the world outside, but the world within. The ground comes next. It shudders before the sky roars, vibrating through boots, rifles, and bones, as if the earth itself were protesting the violence imposed upon it. You feel it first as a subtle tremor under your knees, a faint quiver that spreads slowly through your body, a prelude to the inevitability that follows. Then comes the roar, the thunderous impact of artillery far away, yet close enough to rattle teeth and mud alike. Every explosion sends shockwaves through the trench, rattling sandbags, shaking walls, and leaving behind a cloud of dust that mingles with the scent of iron, smoke, and the damp tang of mud. The earth speaks in these moments, reminding every soldier of the fragility of their place in it. You crouch low, hands pressed into the wet clay at your knees, feeling the vibration pulse up your arms. Around you, the men react in the only ways they know. Clenching rifles, bracing against walls, averted eyes, shallow breaths. Some whisper prayers under their breath, mutter the names of loved ones, or count in a rhythm meant to anchor them to reality. The ground does not pause for thought, for fear, for hesitation. It shifts and trembles, indifferent to all human attempts to negotiate with it. Every step outside the trench, every movement across mud and wire, is measured against these tremors, these reminders that the earth is alive, unpredictable, and in league with neither side. Shells explode in the distance, and each impact sends a shockwave that rolls through the trench like a living thing. The walls shudder, water splashes in shallow pools, and dust rises in faint clouds that make eyes water and lungs burn. You watch as the mud at the edge of the trench heaves and folds under the pressure, threatening to pull boots and bodies down into its cold, grasping hold. The ground itself becomes an enemy, as dangerous as wire, bullets, or gas, claiming men with subtlety and patience rather than speed. You realize that every tremor, every vibration is both warning and judgment, a reminder that the earth does not forget, and it does not forgive. The night brings no comfort. The explosions are more frequent now, each one a pulse that travels along the trench, through walls, through water and mud, settling in the teeth, in the muscles, in the marrow of every man who remains. The ground rises and falls beneath you in a rhythm that mirrors the fear and anticipation in the chest, and sleep becomes a distant impossibility. Even those who have fought for months, hardened by experience, cannot fully mask the way the tremor travels through them, leaving hands unsteady, knees weak, breath shallow. The earth has become a constant reminder of mortality, a force indifferent to rank, training, or courage. By dawn, when the first pale light seeps over the horizon, the tremors have taught their lesson. You adjust your grip on your rifle, plant your boots firmly in the mud, and move with deliberate care, aware that every step is negotiated with ground itself. It is not enough to watch the wire, the mud, or the rats. The earth is the ultimate arbiter of survival, claiming its due without favor or haste. In the trenches of the Great War, the ground shakes, and with every shudder, every pulse, it whispers the unvarnished truth. Here, survival is never guaranteed, and even the earth conspires to make it nearly impossible. The earth screams next. It is not a sound in the usual sense, but a vibration that pulses through every bone, every tendon, every sinew. It rises from the craters, carried on the shockwaves of exploding shells, rolls beneath sandbags and wooden planks, and resonates through the bodies of men crouched in trenches that shake as if alive. The scream is everywhere, yet nowhere, a constant reminder that the ground itself is no longer a passive stage, but an active participant in the destruction. You feel it in your teeth, in the hollow of your chest, in the soles of boots that sink into mud still trembling from previous impacts. The first shells strike miles away, and yet the tremor travels along the earth, like a message written in the language of fear. Sandbags wobble, mud slides in slick rivulets down trench walls, and water pooled in corners ripples in chaotic patterns that mirror the panic in the heart. You grip your rifle, fingers white against cold wood, trying to anchor yourself. Against the invisible movement, trying to convince your body that it can resist what it cannot see. The screaming earth ignores such gestures. It moves regardless of will, indifferent to prayer, to command, to courage. Every tremor is a warning, every quake a rehearsal for inevitability. Around you, men shift unsteadily, some biting lips to restrain cries, some whispering fragments of prayer or memory, and all of them absorbing the lesson the earth imparts. The screaming is not uniform, it rises and falls, unpredictable, sometimes distant, sometimes so close that you feel it in your lungs before your ears catch it. The mud clings with greater ferocity, pulling at boots, at knees, at the very muscles that attempt to resist its grasp. Every heartbeat seems synchronized to the vibration, a rhythm imposed by the battlefield itself, teaching endurance through fear, patience through terror. Rats scuttle as usual, though even they pause, shivering against the tremor of the ground, eyes gleaming with the reflection of distant flashes. Some soldiers stumble over roots or remnants of barbed wire loosened by the shock, slipping into shallow pools of water that are suddenly agitated by the quaking earth. A shell lands closer now, and the explosion amplifies the scream, folding it into the roar of debris and shrapnel. You instinctively duck, pressing your face to the trench wall, feeling the vibration climb through your spine and into every finger, every toe, until it is not just the earth that screams, but the body itself, vibrating with a resonance born of fear and mud and inevitability. The night stretches long and interminable. Between the explosions, between the tremors, the scream lingers, a subtle, almost imperceptible vibration that makes sleep impossible, that gnaws at resolve, that reminds every man that the trenches are alive and merciless. By the time dawn approaches, and the first pale light touches the mud and wire, you understand the lesson fully. The earth is not silent, and it does not forget. It screams to mark each step, each hesitation, each life dangling on the fragile thread between survival and oblivion. In these trenches, to feel the scream is to know the war not just outside the body, but inside it, in every pulse, every shiver, every breath. The screaming earth is a teacher, a judge, and a witness, and its verdict is rarely lenient. The first casualties come not with warning, but with sudden, absolute finality. One moment, men are crouched in the trench, adjusting rifles, wiping mud from their faces, listening to the trembling earth and the distant thunder of shells. The next, a scream pierces the fog, a sound so raw, so fragmented, that it seems to split the very air. You turn toward it, heart hammering, and see a young soldier, barely more than a boy, jerk violently as a shell strikes nearby. The earth around him erupts, mud and debris thrown in a cruel imitation of the wind, and when the tremor settles, he is gone, or worse, caught in the impossible liminality between life and death, his cries swallowed by the screaming earth and the groaning trench walls. You and the others freeze, rooted in place by shock and instinct. Mud sticks to boots, to uniforms, to every surface, yet it feels as though it is holding you back from doing what must be done. Every soldier around you recognizes the same truth. The first casualties are the measure of what survival will cost. They teach lessons that words cannot convey, lessons written in the cries of the wounded, in the absence of men who were moments before present, in the silence that follows the impact. There is no ceremony, no warning, no time to prepare. The casualties are the first proof that the trenches are as lethal as they are inescapable. Hands tremble on rifles, not just from fear, but from adrenaline, from the visceral shock of seeing life extinguished in an instant. The mud around the trench is churned with the bodies of those already claimed, and water gathers in shallow pools reflecting distorted images of helmets, sandbags, and the occasional flash of a pale, unblinking eye. The smell of iron and smoke intensifies as the first casualties are joined by the second and third. Blood mingles with mud, forming a sticky, suffocating paste that coats boots and gloves, that drags at every movement, that presses against the mind with the weight of inevitability. Some men try to help, reaching across splintered planks and slipping in the mud, fingers scraping against uniforms, rifles, and the wet earth as they attempt to drag comrades to safety. Others cannot move, paralyzed by the combination of fear, exhaustion, and the understanding that their efforts may be in vain. The first casualties teach quickly that bravery alone cannot overcome circumstance. Proximity to death is not a matter of courage, but of chance, of timing, of the precise arc of earth and steel in motion. Every man who survives watches, memorizing the details, the angles, the distance, the subtle signs of danger, hoping that awareness alone might grant another fraction of survival. Night descends with a silence that is heavier than any daytime roar. The first casualties are left where they fell, bodies partially obscured by mud and water, rats gathering at the edges, unafraid of the new arrivals. You huddle in the trench, listening to the distant explosions, the tremor of the earth, the whisper of wind through barbed wire, and you understand something impossible yet undeniable. In these trenches, death is omnipresent, patient, and impartial. It claims men before they have time to speak, to think, to pray, and it leaves survivors with only the weight of witnessing. The first casualties have spoken, and their lesson is clear. To endure here is to walk a narrow, treacherous path, where survival is never guaranteed, and life is defined not by courage, but by fortune, instinct, and the cruel favor of the earth itself. The sky comes next, heavy and suffocating, filled with smoke that drifts lazily at first, then thickens into a choking presence. It is not just the remnants of fire from distant shells or burning villages. It is a constant, oppressive layer that blankets the battlefield, mixing with the damp chill of morning and the iron tang of mud and blood. The sun is a pale, weak disk behind this haze, casting a grey light that blurs distance and erases the horizon. You lift your eyes from the trench edge and see it stretching across the sky, a rolling, suffocating quilt that carries the scent of death, fire, and despair. The smoke moves as if it has its own will, curling along the trenches, slipping over sandbags, entering every crevice, and pressing against faces like a living thing. Every inhalation brings it into your lungs, thick and bitter, filling the throat with a taste of ash and fear. You cough, trying to clear it, but the smoke clings, stubborn, invasive, unrelenting. Around you, men shift uncomfortably, hands pressed to faces, eyes squinting against the grey blur that reduces the world to shadows and silhouettes. The earth beneath them vibrates as artillery continues its distant, relentless pounding. But the smoke above makes it impossible to track the source, impossible to distinguish friend from foe, life from death. You notice the way it warps perception. A tree stump looks like a crouching figure. A coil of wire becomes a writhing serpent. Shapes move through it, the mud and wire transforming into forms that tease the imagination and gnaw at nerves already raw with fear. Rats disappear into it and reappear without warning, their small silhouettes dancing across the grey curtain. The men around you speak little, whispers swallowed by the ambient roar of distant guns and the constant, suffocating presence above. The smoke is more than visual, it is tactile, a pressure against the chest, a weight on the shoulders, a companion as constant as the mud beneath your boots. Night brings no reprieve. The smoke thickens as fires ignite beyond the trenches, consuming supply depots, shattered homes, and the skeletal remains of trees. Lanterns cast weak halos, barely piercing the grey veil, and shadows twist unnaturally against trench walls, mimicking the movements of those crouched beneath. The smell, ash, burning wood, human sweat, iron, is a constant reminder of the fragility of life, the proximity of death, and the futility of action in a world so dominated by forces beyond control. Even the men who have survived months of battle flinch at the sight and smell of it, recoiling instinctively as though the smoke itself were a predator with claws and teeth. By dawn, the sky has not lifted. It remains an oppressive ceiling, grey and suffocating, reflecting the battlefield's chaos and the impossibility of escape. You understand, fully, that the smoke is a teacher, a judge, and a witness all at once. It reminds every soldier of their fragility, of the narrowness of survival, and of the fact that in the trenches of the Great War, Life is never certain, and the world itself conspires against the living. You inhale again, choking slightly, and know that the sky will not clear, that the battle is not only around you but above, pressing down, filling every breath, every thought, every shivering muscle with the truth of impossibility. The water comes next. It begins quietly, a thin seep through the walls of the trench, pooling at the edges where sandbags sag and wood rots under relentless damp. At first, it is insignificant, barely enough to wet the boots and trousers of those who move cautiously along the trench floor. But it does not remain insignificant. It gathers in corners, collecting mud, blood, and debris until it becomes a cold, unyielding river that snakes along the trenches, swallowing every step, every movement, every attempt at stability. The water is patient. It waits for exhaustion, for hesitation, for the slightest misstep, and it will claim what it can with quiet, unrelenting force. You crouch in the trench, knees pressed into the thick, sucking mud, fingers tracing the edge of a wooden support to steady yourself. Around you, men shift uneasily, boots squelching, trousers soaked through to the skin. Each movement sends ripples through the shallow pools, disturbing debris and small remnants of the dead, tiny reminders of those who were claimed long before you arrived. You feel the cold bite of the water through leather gloves and woolen socks, creeping slowly upward, leaching warmth from your body, dulling muscles that must remain ready, alert, alive. The rising water is unkind, indiscriminate, as lethal in its slow, creeping fashion as any bullet or shell. It carries with it the smell of the trench itself, iron, mud, rot, and the faint, lingering tang of human sweat and blood. Each step becomes a negotiation between balance and survival. Boots slip, hands scrape against the trench walls, and men curse softly, not from anger, but from the futility of resistance. The water seems to have memory, following tracks, pooling in spots that trap the toes or boots, seeking any advantage over those who attempt to traverse it. Rats, usually bold and brazen, pause at its edges, testing the waters before moving cautiously, a small echo of the careful calculation required to survive in this environment. Night amplifies the effect. Rain falls steadily above, adding to the pools, sending rivulets cascading down walls, already soft and collapsing under persistent moisture. Mud slides into the water, churning with each step, creating suction that threatens to pull soldiers down into its cold, unyielding grasp. The men try to huddle, to rest, to preserve warmth, but even crouching offers little reprieve. Water seeps through every seam, chilling bodies to the bone, leaving teeth clenched against the ache, leaving nerves frayed, leaving every muscle poised on the brink of exhaustion. By dawn, the trench is a river of mud and water, thick with debris, strewn with the remnants of supplies, discarded equipment, and the occasional abandoned helmet or boot. You rise slowly, careful to test each step, aware that the water has no mercy, that its patient, creeping nature makes it one of the most insidious threats in the trench. Survival here is not only a matter of evading bullets or shells. It is a matter of endurance, balance, and constant awareness. The rising water teaches its lesson in silence and persistence. Life is provisional. Movement is perilous. And in the trenches of the Great War, even the elements themselves conspire to make survival nearly impossible. The shrapnel comes next, singing its cruel, unrelenting song. It does not march in formation or announce its arrival. It descends unpredictably, a metallic hailstorm that pierces the air with sharp, high-pitched whistles before it finds its mark. Each fragment is a note in a dreadful symphony, a choir composed of steel and intent, orchestrated by the chaos of war. You hear it first as a faint hum, a vibration that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand at attention. Then it rises, weaving through the sky, shrieking past helmets and rifles, landing with explosive force in mud, sandbags, and occasionally flesh. The music of destruction is everywhere, impossible to ignore, impossible to counter. You crouch low, hands gripping the rifle that now feels heavier with each note of the choir, knuckles white against worn wood. Around you, men flinch, some huddling against trench walls, others pressing their faces into mud, praying for invisibility. The shrapnel does not discriminate. Rank, experience, courage, or despair matter little when steel moves faster than thought. Even those who have survived previous barrages are not immune. Each fragment finds a new path, a new victim, a new lesson in inevitability. The mud absorbs some, the sandbags deflect others, but many are claimed, leaving wounds that scream silently in the darkness, mingling with the cacophony of distant artillery and the tremor of earth already fatigued by relentless bombardment. The choir has its rhythm, but not its mercy. Explosions punctuate the metallic melodies, shaking the trench walls, stirring pools of water into waves, scattering debris that ricochets with a hollow clang. Soldiers adjust instinctively, leaning into the wall, bracing against the earth, counting the intervals between whistles, though they know calculation is only a temporary reprieve. Every sound, every vibration, every flash in the smoke-filled sky is a reminder that survival is fleeting and that the music of shrapnel spares no one who remains exposed, however briefly. Night brings a different cadence. The hum of falling fragments blends with the soft patter of rain, the scuttling of rats, and the whisper of wind through the wire. Shadows twist unnaturally against the trench walls, distorted by faint lantern light and the irregular flash of distant explosions. Soldiers lie tense, every nerve alert, every muscle coiled, listening for the whistle that signals danger, the note that separates life from sudden death. Sleep becomes impossible. Exhaustion cannot silence the choir. Its memory reverberates in hands, in feet, in the subtle tremor that lingers long after the immediate threat has passed. By dawn, the shrapnel choir leaves a landscape transformed. Mud churned by explosions, splintered wood, fragments of metal scattered like jagged confetti, and the bodies of those who could not escape its song. You rise slowly, testing each step in the uneven ground, listening for the faintest whistle in the turf, wind, aware that the chorus will return, again and again. In the trenches of the Great War, the shrapnel choir teaches the same lesson as mud, wire, rats, and earth. Survival is provisional, fragile, and constantly challenged. Every note is a reminder that life here is measured not by bravery alone, but by luck, instinct, and the unrelenting vigilance required to endure a world where even the air itself can kill. The screams come next, though often they are silent. Not the shrill cries of the living, but the muffled, almost imperceptible echoes of agony that hang in the trenches long after the flesh has been torn or the breath has fled. They seep from the mud, from the walls, from the very air, carried invisibly between sandbags and splintered planks. You hear them not with ears, but with the body vibrating in chest and stomach, in trembling hands and knees pressed into cold, unyielding earth. Each soldier feels them differently, a shiver down the spine, a clenching of muscles, a hesitation in movement that is both fear and instinct. The silent screams are the chorus of the fallen, the mournful testament of the impossibility of survival here. You crouch in the trench, shoulders hunched, rifle resting heavily across knees. Around you, the men move quietly, each one a study in tension, listening and watching, waiting for the invisible signals that might mark danger or respite. Some whisper prayers, others mutter names of loved ones, but the silent screams weave through all of it, unheeded by hope, yet impossible to ignore. They are in the mud clinging to boots, in the water pooling in corners, in the trembling parapets and sagging sandbags. Each one is a lesson. The war does not need to shout to kill, and survival is not measured by who screams the loudest, but by who can endure the quiet horror pressed against every sense. The wind carries faint fragments of the screams across no man's land, blending with the smell of iron, smoke, and rain. They are interrupted by the distant roar of artillery, the whistle of incoming shells, the metallic sting of shrapnel in flight. But even these loud intrusions cannot drown out the persistent, insidious presence of anguish. You feel it in the gaps between sound, in the spaces between explosions, in the pause that stretches a heartbeat into eternity. The silent screams are patient, unyielding, and impartial. They claim attention, respect, and fear in equal measure. Night offers no reprieve. The moon casts dim light through a haze of smoke and mist, shadows twisting across faces and trench walls as men lie tense, every muscle coiled, every sense alert. The silent screams press against consciousness, making sleep impossible, stealing warmth and gnawing at resolve. Even those hardened by months of battle cannot escape their reach. Some rock slightly back and forth, as if to sway the voices away. Others huddle tightly, clenching gloves or rifles, trying to anchor themselves against the omnipresent weight of unseen suffering. The earth itself seems to resonate with the echoes, amplifying the invisible chorus and folding it into the tremor of mud, water, and wood. By dawn, the silent screams have taught their lesson. They are not fleeting. They linger in memory, in muscle, in breath. They remind every man that survival is fragile, provisional, measured not in victories or skill alone, but in endurance of fear and constant, gnawing tension. They remind you that in the trenches of the Great War, death is not always loud, and suffering is not always visible. And yet, it is never absent. You rise, boots sinking into the wet mud, eyes scanning the grey horizon, aware that the silent screams will follow, whispering lessons no one can forget, shaping every step, every breath, every heartbeat in a battlefield where living is its own act of defiance. The gas comes next, though it arrives with a subtlety that makes it all the more deadly. It drifts in low, almost invisible, curling along the trenches like smoke from a distant fire, but heavier, with an almost sentient patience. You notice it first by the air itself, the way it tastes metallic on the tongue, the way it coats the throat with an acrid sting that burns and lingers. Soldiers cough reflexively, hands pressed against mouths, noses pinched as best they can, but the invisible enemy moves faster than reaction, seeping through clothing, slipping beneath collars, and filling every crevice of the mud-choked trenches. By the time the eye sees it, if it ever does, it is often too late. You crouch low, hands gripping your rifle, muscles coiled against the instinctive panic the gas provokes. Around you, men cough, gag, struggle for breath, eyes watering and red from irritation. Masks are hastily pulled from packs, secured with trembling hands, but even they are imperfect shields against this persistent, unseen enemy. Some soldiers collapse, convulsing slightly as the poison bites deep, leaving limbs stiff, lungs burning, and consciousness flickering like a candle in the wind. The mud around you seems to thicken, as if it absorbs the very panic that the gas evokes, and you realize that even the earth conspires to trap you in this invisible, suffocating threat. The gas carries with it a deceptive calm, a silence that masks the chaos it produces. It moves without haste, coiling into corners, filling puddles, twisting through the wire that stretches across no man's land. Rats, usually bold, scurry away from pockets where the air tastes most bitter, squealing faintly in alarm. Soldiers stumble as they navigate the trenches, balancing panic against training, instinct against the slow, creeping paralysis that threatens to steal mobility. Every breath becomes a calculation, a negotiation with inevitability. Survival is measured not by courage, but by the ability to endure, to move, to think while the lungs burn and the throat constricts. Night offers no escape. The mist thickens as rain combines with the gas, creating a suffocating slurry that clings to uniforms and seeps into hair and skin. Lanterns cast halos through the haze, revealing pale faces contorted with fear and exhaustion. The smell acrid, metallic, pungent presses relentlessly against the senses. Even those hardened by months of trench warfare falter, coughing, swaying, eyes glassy. Movement becomes a perilous act. Every step risks collapse. Every inhale risks unconsciousness. The gas teaches patience, yes, but in its patience lies terror, for it strikes without pattern, selecting victims with a cruel impartiality. By dawn, the gas lingers, a ghost in the trenches, infiltrating every corner, every breath, every thought. Soldiers press gloves to mouths, bandages over noses, masks secured tight, but the memory of it remains. You understand, fully, that the gas is not merely a weapon, but a lesson in the impossibility of survival here. It teaches that the battlefield is never only physical, that the air itself can betray, that fear can be inhaled, and that life in these trenches is fragile in the most intimate, inescapable ways. To endure is to breathe despite the burn, to move despite the panic, to live in a world that conspires to claim every ounce of strength and hope. The gas hangs as a silent tutor, and the lesson it imparts is unmistakable. In the trenches of the Great War, even the air is lethal. The fallen come next, not all of them fully claimed, but none truly alive. They crawl through the mud, dragging themselves along with hands slick with wet clay, uniforms torn, faces streaked with blood and grime. Some are conscious, eyes wide with shock, lips trembling as they gasp for breath that comes in ragged, shallow bursts. Others have slipped almost entirely into unconsciousness, muscles spasming involuntarily as the mud and cold conspire to slow their desperate movements. You see them inching along the trench floor, hands and knees working in silent defiance, fighting gravity, fear, and the inexorable pull of death itself. You crouch low, heart pounding, watching them struggle against impossible odds. Their movements are awkward and uncoordinated, limbs failing under the weight of exhaustion, mud, and injuries. The trench is narrow, a corridor of chaos where every step must be measured carefully. Yet even careful steps risk toppling into the path of a crawling comrade. Some soldiers try to assist, grabbing wrists, pushing against shoulders, guiding bodies toward the shallowest puddles or slightly firmer ground. But the mud resists, sucking boots, gloves, and skin alike into its grasp, while the water collects in unnatural pools, dragging the fallen down with its silent, wet fingers. The air is thick with the mingled scents of iron, sweat, gunpowder, and the faint, unmistakable tang of blood. Every inhalation carries the weight of the battlefield, the reality of injury, and the inevitability of death. The fallen who crawl are living reminders that even partial survival is tenuous, measured in inches and minutes rather than days or hours. You note the tremor in their hands, the way their eyes dart toward the sky, the subtle shudder of muscles as the body fights against the trauma it has suffered. Each man, each boy, carries his own story of near escape, yet the trench itself threatens to erase them, swallowing limbs and hope alike in its relentless mud and water. Night brings no reprieve. Lanterns cast a feeble glow through the haze of smoke and fog, illuminating faces contorted in pain, eyes glimmering with fear and desperation. The fallen continue to crawl, unseen until the last moment, creating a labyrinth of bodies that must be navigated with care. Rats scuttle past, indifferent to suffering, gnawing at scraps of clothing, and mud shifts subtly as the trench settles, threatening to trap limbs or overturn bodies entirely. The earth is merciless, indifferent to both effort and courage, and the crawling men are caught between its patience and the chaos of shells, wire, and gas. By dawn, the trench is littered with evidence of struggle, discarded rifles, broken sandbags, boots left behind, and men who have crawled as far as they could before exhaustion claims them. You rise cautiously, observing the paths carved by those who fought against the impossible, understanding fully that survival is fleeting, fragile, and partial. The fallen, who crawl, are living lessons in endurance and despair, reminders that in these trenches, the line between life and death is measured not in acts of heroism, but in the slow, relentless battle against mud, earth, exhaustion, and fear. Every inch gained is hard-won, every breath earned, and every moment survived is a defiance against the inevitability that surrounds you. The dawn comes, but it brings nothing. The horizon bleeds pale light, soft and grey, failing to touch warmth or comfort. The trenches, slick with mud and water, seem to absorb it, reflecting the faint glow in shallow pools that ripple with every movement. The earth, churned and broken, lies like a wounded creature, its surface scarred with craters, the remnants of barbed wire, and the scattered detritus of men who were not fast, not lucky, not strong enough to escape its grasp. You lift your head over the parapet and see no victory, no respite, only the endless expanse of churned earth and wire, the twisted forms of the dead and wounded, and the quiet insistence of inevitability pressing from all sides. The mud clings to boots, trousers, and hands, carrying with it the iron tang of blood, the acrid stench of gunpowder, and the subtle, lingering sweetness of decay. Every breath draws these smells deeper into your lungs, a constant reminder that survival is provisional, measured not in days, but in inches, in seconds, in the shallow gap between chaos and the next shell. The men around you move slowly, mechanically, faces pale and drawn, eyes scanning the horizon as if the dawn might carry answers that the night never promised. But the light does not change the battlefield. It only illuminates its relentless, indifferent reality. You notice the boots left upright against trench walls, the sandbags split by impact, the shattered rifles and helmets. Each is a silent testament to the men who came before, some of whom may have crawled, some of whom may have fallen instantly, all of whom are now a part of the landscape. Rats scuttle among them, undisturbed, indifferent to rank or valor, gnawing at the remnants that the earth has spared. The dawn does not alter their rule, nor the lessons of endurance, fear, and futility they impart. The earth is patient, unyielding, and impartial, claiming what it will with neither speed nor hesitation. Voices are few. Whispers trace the foes, trenches, carrying orders, prayers, and fragments of conversation, but they are drowned quickly by the distant roar of artillery and the persistent hum of tension that never truly leaves the air. Every man understands the rhythm of the day-to-day in this place. Movement is measured, each step calculated, each breath precious. The dawn offers no comfort, no illusion of reprieve. It is merely light falling over the same mud, the same wire, the same persistent, omnipresent threat. The horizon stretches endlessly, revealing the impossibility of escape, the narrow margin between survival and oblivion, the cruel arithmetic of inches and seconds that determines who will live and who will not. By mid-morning, the soldiers adjust, moving slowly along the trench floor, rifles at the ready, eyes trained on the horizon. The mud sucks at boots, the water collects in shallow pools, and the smell of iron and smoke lingers as a constant companion. You understand fully that the dawn does not herald hope, it only exposes the truth. Survival in these trenches is not measured by courage or preparation, but by endurance, chance, and the ability to continue despite the certainty that death is never far, and that the world itself conspires to make survival almost impossible. And as you take your next step in the cold, grey light, you realize that in the trenches of the Great War, each dawn is not a beginning, it is a continuation of an unbroken nightmare that tests every fibre of body and soul. The mud deepens next, a slow, creeping menace that does not announce itself, but asserts its presence with relentless insistence. It begins as a film along the trench floor, clinging to boots and trousers, soaking through wool and leather until fabric and flesh are indistinguishable. Then it thickens, forming sticky, cold pools that suck at every step, pulling men down inch by inch, as if the earth itself were determined to claim them. It creeps into every crevice, clinging to rifles, helmets, and gloves, coating every surface with a slick layer of weight and resistance. To move is to fight against it constantly, to expend energy with every step, to measure each action against the slow, patient pull of the earth. You crouch, hands pressed into the mud to steady yourself, feeling its cold bite through gloves and into skin. Around you, soldiers shift uneasily, boots squeaking and sliding in the waterlogged trench. Even the strongest, most experienced men struggle against it, muscles straining, bodies wobbling as they try to maintain balance. The mud is not merely an obstacle. It is a persistent force, one that tests patience, endurance, and determination in ways that bullets or shells cannot. It is patient, calculating, indifferent to rank or courage, and it will claim its toll regardless of skill or experience. The deeper it becomes, the more it carries with it the detritus of war. Fragments of uniforms, discarded equipment, shards of wood and metal. Pools of water collected in its uneven surface reflect pale faces, twisted expressions, and the faint glow of lanterns that struggle against the grey light of dawn. You watch as soldiers lift feet slowly, carefully, only to have boots sink back into the mud with a sickening suction. Fingers slip along wooden supports to maintain balance. Gloves smear with sludge, leaving residue in the creases of sandbags. The mud is tactile, intimate, and unrelenting. It presses into every joint, every fold of clothing, every inch of exposed skin, a constant reminder of the impossibility of ease or comfort in the trenches. Night makes the mud more dangerous still. Rain falls steadily, adding weight and depth, flooding shallow trenches and creating pools that obscure footing. Men huddle where they can, trying to avoid slipping, trying to preserve warmth and energy, but the cold penetrates every layer. Each movement becomes a negotiation with inevitability. The mud resists every action, and failure is immediately evident in a boot swallowed too deeply, a hand slipping, a body unbalanced. Even rats must adjust their movements, leaping carefully between ridges, moving with a cautious precision that humans find increasingly difficult to emulate. By dawn, the trench is transformed into a river of mud and water, slick, unyielding, and omnipresent. Every step is a calculation. Every breath carries the weight of the earth pressing against your body. You understand that the mud is not merely part of the landscape, but a force with which every man must contend. It teaches patience, endurance, and humility, and it spares no one. In the trenches of the Great War, the mud deepens, and with every inch it claims, it reinforces the harsh truth. Survival is provisional, measured not by courage alone, but by the ability to persist against relentless, unyielding resistance. It is a teacher without mercy, a presence without compromise, and a reminder that the battlefield itself is as lethal as any enemy soldier. The lice come next, small, unassuming, and infinitely patient. They move through the trenches with quiet determination, invisible at first, yet unmistakably present once noticed. They are everywhere, crawling through hair, matted with sweat and grime, slipping under collars, burrowing into seams of uniforms damp from mud and rain. At first, their presence is only a faint itch, a subtle irritation that can be ignored while focusing on rifles, mud, and the distant thrum of artillery. But soon, it becomes impossible to ignore. The itching spreads, sharp and insistent, gnawing at the edges of concentration, distracting from every movement, every thought, every necessary act of survival. You crouch low in the trench, fingers pressed to hair and clothing, brushing at the tiny intruders that seem to multiply with every passing hour. Around you, men shift uncomfortably, muttering curses under their breath, scratching where hands can reach, and flinching where they cannot. Even the strongest and most disciplined struggle against them, the constant, crawling presence of life that feeds on their fatigue, their sweat, their very existence. The lice are relentless, indifferent to rank or bravery, and imperceptibly effective in reminding every soldier of the fragility of comfort, hygiene, and morale. Night makes them worse. Bodies pressed close together in narrow trenches, hair damp from rain or sweat, uniforms unwashed and caked with mud. These conditions are ideal for swarming. Men try to lie still, exhausted from hours of shivering in cold, wet mud, but the crawling insistence gnaws at concentration and patience. Fingers move obsessively, brushing over collars, ruffling hair, tearing at seams, yet the lice persist, slipping back into places unseen, multiplying faster than the body can respond. Every bite itches, every movement stings, every scratch feels insufficient, and the mind begins to fray under the constant, low-grade torment. Even sleep offers little relief. The mited, itching, the crawling, and the awareness of parasites make rest fleeting, fitful, and never truly restorative. The lice are a teacher, merciless and persistent. They teach the soldiers that discomfort can be invisible, yet unbearable, that endurance is not only a matter of surviving mud, bullets, or shells, but of surviving the subtle, creeping invasions of the body itself. They force men to confront the limitations of cleanliness, the impossibility of comfort, and the quiet terror of having control over one's own body stripped away by a creature smaller than a fingernail. Even the strongest soldier cannot overcome their persistence entirely. The lice do not negotiate. They do not pause. They do not yield. By dawn, men emerge from brief, restless slumber with raw, scratched hands, hair matted, and faces weary. The lice have multiplied in the night, persistent as the mud and water, as the wire and gas. They are a constant reminder that survival in the trenches is not measured only by the avoidance of bullets or shrapnel, but by enduring the small, intimate horrors that gnaw at the mind and body with relentless patience. In the trenches of the Great War, lice swarm, teaching what no officer or order ever could. That even the tiniest unseen adversaries can undermine morale, sap strength, and remind every soldier that life here is fragile, provisional, and never wholly under their control. The rain comes next, relentless and unyielding, a grey curtain that seeps into every corner of the trenches, saturating earth, uniforms, and resolve alike. At first, it is only a drizzle, cold and persistent, washing over faces and dripping from helmets. But it does not remain gentle. It gathers in sheets, hammering against wooden planks and sandbags, filling shallow pools that merge with mud already thick and treacherous. Every step becomes a struggle. Every movement is resisted by slick, sucking clay. The rain is patient, insidious, and indifferent. It does not distinguish between young and old, seasoned and novice, brave and fearful. It claims everyone equally, softening the earth, sharpening the chill, and amplifying the exhaustion that has already taken root in every muscle. You crouch low in the trench, shoulders hunched, rifle clutched tightly, as water runs down sleeves and trickles into gloves. Around you, soldiers adjust the folds of their clothing, press hands to faces, and try to shield their eyes, but the rain finds every opening. It soaks through fabric, cools the skin, and presses down with a weight that seems almost sentient. The mud beneath your boots churns, deeper than before, threatening to swallow ankles, even knees, with each careful step. Every movement is deliberate, every breath measured, every thought overshadowed by the cold persistence of water that will not relent. The smell of iron and earth intensifies as rain soaks the battlefield. Blood from the fallen mixes with mud and water, creating a dense, metallic aroma that clings to the air and coats every inhalation. The wind carries it through the trenches, mixing with the scent of damp wool and leather, creating a sensory reminder that the world beyond the trench is indifferent and dangerous. Rats move more boldly, scuttling through puddles and along edges, feeding on what they can, indifferent to the suffering around them. Even they are more at ease in the wet, slippery chaos than the soldiers, who are burdened not only by gear and mud, but by the constant, pressing awareness of their fragility. Night brings no comfort. The rain continues without pause, turning the trenches into rivers of mud and sludge. The walls, weakened by weeks of bombardment and constant moisture, sag and threaten collapse, while sandbags split, releasing water that floods the floors further. Sleep is impossible. Exhaustion offers only temporary reprieve, as the chill penetrates layers of clothing and bone alike. Fingers and toes go numb, teeth chatter, and muscles stiffen. But the mind must remain alert, ears straining for the whistle of shells, the scrape of wire, the low groan of men and earth alike. The rain is both enemy and teacher, patient and unyielding, revealing the impossibility of comfort or escape in this environment. By dawn, the battlefield has been transformed into a sodden, slick, and unyielding landscape. The trenches are deeper, mud heavier, and water everywhere. You lift to your head to scan the horizon, knowing that the rain has not diminished the danger, it has magnified it. Every step forward is resisted not only by earth, wire, and shell, but by the persistent, patient force of the weather itself. In the trenches of the Great War, the endless rain teaches that survival is endurance multiplied, endurance of mud, exhaustion, fear, and the ceaseless, soaking reminder that the world is indifferent to the living, and that even the elements conspire to make survival nearly impossible. The rats come back with dusk, emboldened by the darkness and the persistent smell of blood, mud, and human sweat that permeates the trenches. They are everywhere, moving with silent, confident determination, gnawing, scavenging, and slipping through gaps that no human could squeeze through. Some are small and wiry, others thick-bodied and bold, their fur matted with mud, their eyes gleaming in the weak light. They do not flee the shells or the shouting. They move with a predatory ease that makes the soldiers around them shiver. In this world, the rats are masters, and the men are intruders, negotiating survival in a terrain that seems as much theirs as it is human. You crouch low, fingers pressed against the rifle, eyes scanning the muddy floor for any sudden movement. The rats are audacious. They run along the edges of boots, across helmets, left temporarily unattended, over sandbags damp from endless rain. They scavenge for food, crumbs dropped during a hastily eaten ration, scraps of meat from fallen comrades, pieces of leather and cloth to drag into their burrows. The soldiers flinch as a bold one leaps onto a sandbag beside them, tiny claws scratching along fabric, and the body reacts instinctively, jerking, swallowing fear and revulsion alike. Yet the rats continue undeterred, teaching, in their quiet, merciless way, that even in the trenches, survival is not only measured by skill or courage, but by awareness, agility, and the ability to endure the small, unrelenting horrors that gnaw at body and mind. Night deepens, and the rats grow bolder. Shadows twist along the walls of the trench as lanterns flicker in the wind, illuminating figures that appear to move unnaturally fast, disappearing as quickly as they appear. Soldiers lie pressed against walls, exhausted and cold, while the rats move among them, fearless, indifferent to human hierarchy or presence. Some men try to swat at them, to push them away, but the creatures are too quick, too cunning. Each bite, each scratch, each startled jump reinforces the lesson. No one is untouchable, and no space is entirely safe. The smell of iron, blood, and decay is thick, and the rats feast with patient efficiency, gnawing at scraps left behind by shells, scavenging among the mud and water that fills every corner. They are constant reminders that the battlefield is indiscriminate, that the smallest creatures can survive and thrive where humans struggle desperately to exist. Even when the artillery roars and the shells scream overhead, the rats continue their foraging, unaffected by explosions, chaos, or fear. They are both a nuisance and a grim teacher, showing the men that adaptability, vigilance, and endurance are as vital as courage. By dawn, the rats have claimed their nightly spoils and retreated into burrows or hidden crevices, leaving behind traces of their activity, chewed scraps, tracks in the mud, tiny droppings, and the lingering sense of their omnipresence. The soldiers rise, exhausted and wary, aware that these small, relentless creatures will return, patient as the mud, the wire, and the earth itself. In the trenches of the Great War, the rats that feast are a reminder that survival is never total, that the environment itself conspires against human life, and that the battlefield teaches its lessons in both grand and subtle ways. Every inch gained, every breath drawn, every heartbeat survived is measured against a world that does not pause, does not forgive, and does not forget. The letters come next, though often they arrive too late. Damp, smeared, and partially illegible, carried through rain and mud, handled by hands already trembling with cold and fatigue. They are meant to connect the soldiers to the world beyond the trenches, to remind them of home, family, and life untouched by the horrors of war. Yet by the time they reach their hands, the letters are fragile, ink running in jagged streaks, paper soft and crumbling at the edges. The words they bear are sometimes comforting, sometimes frightening, but always fleeting, unable to truly bridge the distance between the trenches and the world left behind. You unfold one carefully, pressing it against your chest for warmth, trying not to let the dampness destroy the fragile script. Around you, comrades do the same, muttering names under breath, recognizing familiar handwriting, tracing loops and curves with trembling fingers. The letters speak of ordinary life, markets, meals, letters sent in response, birthdays celebrated in absentia. Yet the smell of mud, iron, and smoke pervades everything, and the words, though meant to comfort, are ghostly echoes against the relentless reality of the trenches. They remind the men of what they have lost, of what exists beyond this endless cycle of mud, wire, gas, and artillery, and of the fragility of hope itself. Night brings little solace. The letters, stacked carefully to avoid further damage, seem to carry weight beyond their paper. Some soldiers read aloud in hushed tones, the words breaking into coughs and shivering breaths, while others stare blankly, memorizing phrases they cannot carry home. Each letter is a reminder that the world continues outside, indifferent to the suffering in the trenches. Some letters are never read fully, abandoned mid-sentence as a shell lands too close, mud splashing over pages and hands alike. The letters rot not only from moisture, but from the impossibility of the circumstances, dissolving into nothingness. Even as the soldiers cling desperately to their messages, the rats, ever persistent, scuttle among the letters, sniffing and nibbling at corners, leaving small traces of their presence. The men brush them away with frustration, though they know it is temporary. The creatures are as patient as the mud, the wire, and the earth itself. Waterlogged trenches cause letters to warp and tear, ink to blur, and words meant to comfort to become cryptic, fading symbols that speak as much of decay as of connection. Even when held close to the chest for warmth, the letters cannot resist the cold, the damp, the unrelenting oppression of the battlefield. By dawn, the letters lie softened and tattered, a testament to the impossibility of maintaining contact with life outside the trenches. They teach a lesson that bullets, shells, and mud cannot. Survival is not only measured in movement or vigilance, but in endurance of hope and memory. Every soldier understands that the words are fragile, ephemeral, and often incomplete, much like life in the trenches itself. To hold a letter, to read it, to carry it, is an act of defiance against a world determined to consume everything. Boots, bodies, mud, and even the inked words meant to remind men that a world beyond still exists. In the trenches of the Great War, the letters rot, and with them, the illusion of comfort, leaving only the hard, cold truth of endurance, loss, and impossibility. The tremor comes next, subtle at first, like a faint echo in the limbs, a whisper of exhaustion that cannot yet be named. It begins in the fingers, in the hands clutching rifles that feel heavier with each passing hour, then spreads to wrists, elbows, knees, and finally deep into the muscles of the legs and back. You notice it first as a slight quiver when adjusting position in the mud, a small shaking of boots pressed against wet earth. Around you, other soldiers exhibit the same signs, shoulders hitching, lips pressed tightly together, eyelids fluttering with fatigue, the body betraying what the mind attempts to conceal. The tremor is a whisper of mortality, a physical echo of the relentless impossibility of surviving in these trenches. Hours of crouching, crawling, and shivering in cold, rain-soaked mud have combined with hunger, thirst, and fear to sap strength from every man. Even small movements require deliberate attention, calculations of balance, weight, and effort. Fingers that once gripped rifles firmly now shake as if the metal itself were too heavy, as if the earth beneath demanded tribute in energy and resolve. Each tremor is amplified by adrenaline, by anticipation, by the constant uncertainty of what lurks beyond the parapet. A shell lands somewhere nearby, and the tremor becomes full body, a reflexive shudder that courses through legs, spine, and arms in unison. It is involuntary, merciless, and indiscriminate. The mud and water worsen its effect. Every step is resisted not only by gravity but by suction. Every grip on wooden planks or rifle stocks challenged by the slick, cold surfaces. Exhaustion becomes tangible, a weight that pulls at joints and sinews, a force as tangible as the earth itself. Soldiers whisper to one another in low tones, sharing brief instructions or reassurance. But even the sound of human voice is no relief. The tremor is relentless, indifferent to camaraderie, courage, or morale. It courses through everyone, linking them in quiet, shared suffering, a testament to the unyielding nature of life in the trenches. Night amplifies its effect. Darkness is a cold companion, rain and mist adding layers of discomfort, each breath a small effort against fatigue and damp chill. Muscles stiffen, joints ache, and the body trembles not just from cold, but from the accumulated hours of tension, exposure, and alertness required to survive. Sleep is elusive, and when it comes, it is shallow, broken, haunted by images of mud, wire, rats, and shells. The tremor lingers even when resting, a residual echo of exertion that prevents full reprieve, reminding soldiers that survival demands not only courage, but endurance of the body itself. By dawn, every man is marked by the tremor. Fingers twitch, knees wobble, arms sag with the effort of gripping rifles. It is a teacher, cruel yet unignorable, instructing that survival is provisional, earned in increments of movement and breath, in vigilance despite exhaustion. The trenches of the Great War do not merely challenge life. They sap it slowly, systematically, leaving tremors as physical records of human fragility. You rise cautiously, muscles quivering, boots sinking in mud, acutely aware that every step, every breath, every heartbeat is both defiance and negotiation with the impossibility of endurance. In these trenches, the tremor is as lethal as bullets, as persistent as mud, and as inescapable as the earth itself. The night comes again, long and merciless, stretching across the trenches like a living thing with teeth. It is not darkness alone, but a weight pressing down from above, curling around every man, every rifle, every sandbag, until the world seems smaller, tighter, impossibly confined. There is no horizon, no comforting stars, only the dim, uncertain glow of lanterns that flicker against mud-slicked walls. The night is alive with sound, the distant rumble of artillery, the low groan of the earth settling under the weight of men and water, the subtle scraping of rats along boards and planks. Every noise is amplified, every movement exaggerated, and every breath carries the knowledge that danger lurks, both seen and unseen. You crouch low, knees pressed into the mud, rifle clutched tightly, muscles coiled, every sense alert. Around you, men shift restlessly, whispering quietly, adjusting uniforms and gloves, rubbing at numb fingers, eyes darting across shadows that move like specters in the faint light. Sleep is a fragile illusion, stolen only in brief, fleeting moments before some tremor, some distant shell, or the whisper of wind across the wire drags consciousness back into the relentless present. The night stretches on, each minute indistinguishable from the next, a slow, unending test of endurance and nerve, leaving every man acutely aware of the fragility of life in the trenches. Mud and water deepen the sense of entrapment. Pools that have collected in low points of the trench reflect lantern light in eerie ripples, revealing glimpses of faces, rifles, and hands that appear to float in the grey haze. Boots sink with every movement, dragging weight and fatigue into the effort of simply maintaining position. Soldiers press themselves against walls, huddling for warmth and to stabilize their trembling muscles. Yet the cold seeps relentlessly into bones, chilling them to the marrow. Every sound, water dripping from sandbags, mud squelching beneath a footstep, the ball, faint scrape of a rat becomes magnified, part of the symphony of unease that dominates the night. The night teaches patience and fear in equal measure. Time stretches into hours that feel like days. Every soldier understands instinctively that movement must be measured, speech must be hushed, and energy must be conserved. The earth itself seems to breathe alongside them, subtle tremors rolling through the walls and floor of the trench, a reminder that even stillness is not safe. Each heartbeat, each shallow breath, becomes a calculation, a negotiation with inevitability. a quiet act of defiance against the slow accumulation of exhaustion and despair. By dawn, when pale light seeps over the horizon, the men are battered, soaked, and hollow-eyed. Limbs ache, muscles tremble, and minds are frayed from hours of vigilance that never truly ended. The night has left its mark not only on bodies but on resolve, a reminder that survival is provisional, earned in increments of awareness, endurance, and endurance alone. In the trenches of the Great War, the night never ends, not truly. It lingers in mud, in water, in trembling limbs, in the low hum of fear that persists even when dawn arrives. And as you rise to face another day, boots sinking in mud and fingers numb, you understand fully. The trenches are a world without pause, and every night survived is a defiance against a reality that conspires relentlessly to claim every man within its grasp. The fever comes quietly at first, creeping through the body like a thief in the night. One moment, a man feels only weariness, a stiffness in joints from hours crouched in mud, the chill of rain seeping into his bones. The next, heat ignites beneath skin, and sweat breaks across the brow, pooling in hair matted with grime. The body trembles, muscles twitch involuntarily, and a dull, persistent ache spreads from head to toe. In the trenches, fever is more than illness, it is an additional enemy, invisible, patient, indiscriminate, claiming strength and alertness as surely as any shell or bullet. You crouch low, trying to steady yourself, feeling the tremor of exhaustion amplified by warmth and chill that war together to confuse the body. Around you, men shiver, sweat glistening on mud-streaked faces, lips cracked from dehydration and stress. Some moan softly, pressed against the trench wall, rubbing at foreheads or stomachs in an effort to ward off the creeping weakness. Others sit, stiff and silent, staring into the grey haze of smoke, rain, and dawn, as if the earth itself were capable of holding them accountable for survival. The fever spreads like wildfire among those already weakened, moving silently, lethally, and it spares no one. The mud and water worsen its effects. Boots and trousers are soaked, chilling limbs even as the fever sets fire beneath the skin. The cold of the trench contrasts violently with the internal heat, leaving muscles twitching in response to the contradictory signals. Hands shake, eyes water, and even the simplest movements adjusting a rifle, leaning over a sandbag, shifting weight to maintain balance become exercises in endurance. The mind struggles to focus, calculations of distance, movement, and timing now burdened by the fog of internal struggle. Each breath draws moisture into lungs that burn with cold and fever alike, reminding every soldier that survival is measured not only against bullets and shells, but against the body's own failures. Night magnifies the danger. Fevered men writhe in cramped spaces, shivering and sweating, unable to rest, unable to find relief. Whispered conversations are punctuated by coughs and murmurs of pain, lantern light flickering across pale, damp faces. Some soldiers cling to each other for warmth, others lie stiffly against walls, too exhausted to move, eyes half closed, awareness flickering like a candle in the wind. The rats continue to scuttle among the mud, indifferent to human suffering, their tiny presence a cruel contrast to the fragility of fevered men. By dawn, the fever has claimed more than energy, it has claimed clarity, coordination, and resolve. Faces are flushed, eyes glassy, limbs trembling beyond voluntary control. The battlefield seems even more impossible. The mud, wire, and earth, heavier and more menacing under the weight of illness. You understand, fully, that the fever is not merely a symptom, but a teacher. It demonstrates that survival in the trenches is provisional, contingent not only on courage or skill, but on the body itself remaining intact. Every step taken while fevered is an act of defiance, every breath earned a victory, every hour endured a testament to endurance. In the Great War, the fever spreads silently, invisibly, and lethally, leaving no man untouched, and reminding all who survive that even life itself can betray in the most intimate and impossible ways. The night comes once more, heavier than before, thick with mist, and the lingering sense of mud, iron, and smoke. It presses down on the trenches like a living weight, saturating the air with dread and exhaustion. Lanterns sway in the chill wind, casting trembling halos across the walls, illuminating the mud-slick floor and the occasional glint of a rifle barrel. Around you, men shift uncomfortably, faces pale and drawn, eyes wide, muscles taut with tension. Every movement is measured, deliberate. Even the act of breathing feels precarious, as though inhaling too deeply might invite the earth, the sky, or the unseen dangers lurking beyond the trench to claim what remains of life. You crouch, knees pressed into the cold, waterlogged mud, gripping your rifle with fingers numb from both chill and fatigue. The wind whistles softly along the wire, carrying distant echoes of explosions, low rumbles of artillery, and faint, almost imperceptible cries. The men around you whisper, voices, hoarse and tight, offering brief fragments of communication. Instructions, prayers, or simple murmurs meant to anchor the mind in the fragile tether of shared human presence. Yet even these whispers are swallowed almost immediately by the pressing silence, the hum of anticipation, and the omnipresent threat that crouches alongside every soldier in the trench. The mud deepens its grip as rain continues to fall, pooling in trenches, softening the earth into a quagmire that threatens every step. Water clings to boots, trousers, and gloves, chilling the body even as the tremors of fatigue and fear course through muscles already overtaxed. Soldiers press themselves against walls or lie flat in shallow puddles, hoping to conserve warmth and energy. Yet the night provides no respite. Every shift of position, every adjustment of clothing, every attempt at rest is resisted by the environment itself, cold, wet, and merciless. The rats, ever bold, scuttle along the edges, undisturbed by human suffering, their tiny claws clicking across boards and mud as they move with predatory confidence, reinforcing the sense of vulnerability and the impossibility of escape from even the smallest horrors. Sleep is elusive. When it comes, it is fragmented and shallow, haunted by the sights and sounds of the day, the mud, the wire, the fallen, the tremors of artillery, the silent screams, the fevered moans of the ill. Dreams are intruded upon by flashes of explosions, by the imagined trajectories of shells, by the glint of wire and the cold reflection of moonlight on waterlogged trenches. Even the briefest moments of unconsciousness are punctuated by instinctive movements, a shift to avoid mud, a clutch at the rifle, a turn toward imagined danger. The night stretches interminably, each hour folding into the next, teaching endurance, patience, and fear in equal measure. By dawn, the men are hollowed, exhausted, wet, and shivering. The night has left its mark on body, mind, and spirit. Limbs tremble, muscles ache, and eyes strain against the pale grey light that seeps over the horizon. Every soldier knows the lesson the night imparts. Survival is provisional, earned not only through courage and vigilance, but through the relentless endurance of body, mind, and nerve. The night never truly ends. It lingers in every shiver, every heartbeat, every cautious breath. In the trenches of the Great War, the night is a constant adversary, a merciless companion, and a reminder that life is measured in persistence against forces that are patient, omnipresent, and impossibly cruel. The comrades vanish next, one by one, often without warning, leaving only the faintest trace that they were ever there. You see it first in empty spaces beside sandbags, in rifles left leaning against walls, in boots half buried in mud where a body once pressed against the trench floor. Some vanish in a blink, swallowed by shells, mud, or the sudden sweep of a volley, leaving no sound, no warning, only the echo of absence. Others crawl, dragging themselves along the trench floor, only to falter and sink, leaving behind gloves, helmets, and the memory of struggle. Their disappearance is not always violent, but it is always absolute, and it teaches a lesson deeper than fear. Survival is provisional, and even those closest to you can be claimed without ceremony or notice. You crouch low, fingers pressed into mud, eyes scanning the horizon, ears straining for any sound of movement, but knowing instinctively that the void left by vanished comrades is silent, and complete. Around you, soldiers glance at one another, trying to measure risk and determine who remains, who has been claimed, who will follow next. There is no comfort in camaraderie here, no assurance that the presence of others will shield you from the inexorable reality of war. Each disappearance reinforces the relentless truth of the trenches, that even proximity, familiarity, and shared courage cannot protect a man from the arbitrary reach of death. Night amplifies the terror. Shadows stretch and twist across trench walls in the dim glow of lanterns, making it impossible to distinguish between what is absent and what merely hides. Every subtle shift, every small noise becomes a threat, a potential sign of another vanishing. Soldiers whisper in muted tones, recounting last-seen moments of friends, the rhythm of their steps, the faint sounds they made, holding on to fragments as if these could tether them to reality. Yet no fragment is permanent. Even memory is slippery, eroded by exhaustion, fear, and the constant assault of mud, rain, and bombardment. The earth itself participates in these vanishings. Mud, water, and collapsing walls conspire to obscure, absorb, and erase. Boots sink, bodies twist, and the ground becomes a partner in the silent theft, claiming men as surely as shells or gas. Rats scuttle over the empty spaces, indifferent to absence or grief, feasting on what is left behind, a cruel mirror to the human inability to control the battlefield. Each vanished comrade becomes both lesson and ghost, a reminder of fragility, of chance, and of the narrow margin between life and oblivion. By dawn, the trench is quieter, but the absence is heavier than any sound. The soldiers move carefully, aware that each step, each shift in the mud, each glance over the parapet is measured against the reality that those who stood beside them yesterday may not be there today. Survival is fleeting, provisional, earned in inches, breaths, and seconds. The vanished comrades leave behind more than bodies or equipment. They leave awareness, a grim understanding that the trenches of the Great War are not merely terrain but living, breathing entities that claim what they will, shaping the endurance, fear, and resolve of every man who remains. To survive here is to bear witness to absence, to navigate the impossible, and to endure the weight of a world that spares almost no one. The shells come next, not indiscriminately, but as if they have learned the names of the men below. They scream through the sky with a metallic whine, cutting through the damp morning air and vibrating through earth and bone alike. Each one lands with precision, tearing the mud, sandbags, and timber apart, sending showers of debris into the air. You feel the tremor in your feet first, a subtle pulse through the boots and knees, then a violent jolt that rattles shoulders and rifles. There is no pattern, only inevitability. The shells arrive with a cruel accuracy that seems almost sentient, claiming territory, marking survivors, and leaving destruction in their wake. You crouch low in the trench, hands gripping the rifle as if it could anchor you against the impact. Around you, men flinch and huddle closer to walls, shoulders hunched against the blast, eyes squinting against the stinging dust and flying mud. The shells scream overhead, whistle, and explode, and in those moments, the world becomes both unbearably loud and maddeningly still. Every man instinctively calculates distance, timing, and the arc of flight, but logic offers no guarantee. Survival is never earned through skill alone. It is a negotiation with chaos, an agreement struck in inches, seconds, and breath. The shells are teachers, precise and indifferent, offering lessons in humility and the limits of control. The mud and water exacerbate their effect. Every explosion shakes the trench floor, loosening footing, sloshing water into boots and trenches, and pulling at muscles already fatigued from hours of crouching, moving, and enduring. The walls tremble under the impact, sandbags collapse, and even small debris, splintered wood, metal fragments, and wet earth becomes a threat in itself. Hands shake as rifles are adjusted, gloves slip in wet mud, and eyes strain to track the movement of the deadly projectiles above. The shells are relentless, teaching men that danger is omnipresent and that the earth itself can no longer be trusted as stable or safe. Night brings no reprieve. The shells continue to fall at irregular intervals, each one a reminder that vigilance cannot cease. The darkness conceals their precise origin, making every whistle of wind a potential threat. Men lie pressed against walls, shivering, damp, trembling not only from cold, but from exhaustion and anticipation. Even sleep is haunted by the memory of arcs, the sound of explosions, the subtle vibration that precedes impact. The shells learn the rhythm of the trenches, responding to movement, anticipation, and instinct, punishing the slightest miscalculation, leaving men hollowed and wary. By dawn, the trench bears the scars of the night. Mud churned, walls damaged, bodies and equipment displaced, and the lingering hum of tension fills the air. You rise cautiously, feeling the tremor still echo in bones and muscles, aware that every breath, every step, every heartbeat is provisional. The shells have taught the same lesson the mud, the rats, and the gas have taught. Survival in these trenches is measured not in skill or bravery alone, but in endurance, vigilance, and the fragile favor of fortune. They learn your name, it seems, and whether you survive or vanish depends on the narrowest margin of chance, awareness, and resilience in a world that conspires relentlessly against life. The mud comes next, deeper than ever, thick with water, blood, and the debris of war. It is not simply the ground beneath your boots, but a living, unrelenting force that reaches up to claim what it can. Every step is resisted. Boots are pulled down as though by invisible hands. Knees sink into quagmires that hold with a patient grip. And the walls of the trench seem to lean in, pressing the men closer together. You move slowly, deliberately, hands pressed against soaked timber to steady yourself, fingers slick with mud that clings with every ounce of gravity. Even the act of breathing feels heavier, as if the earth itself weighs upon your chest, demanding tribute for every inhale. Around you, comrades struggle with the same relentlessness. A man in the next section of trench loses balance, boots sliding in the sucking mud, and flails just long enough for another soldier to catch him by the wrist. Both are coated in wet earth, trembling, faces pale, muscles aching from the constant effort to maintain position against a force as patient as it is cruel. You watch, realizing that skill, experience, and courage do little against mud that is determined, unyielding, and indifferent to the desires or efforts of men. It does not discriminate. It only claims, gradually, thoroughly, mercilessly. The mud carries with it the residue of war, fragments of sandbags, splintered wood, shards of helmet and rifle, scraps of uniform, and sometimes more human remains. Water mingles with the earth, creating pools in which debris floats, sometimes obscuring deadly pitfalls. A hand slips into one of these pools, fingers clutching at nothing but sludge, and you see clearly how easily the trench itself can consume the living. The mud is a slow, patient killer, a force that teaches endurance in its own intimate, inescapable way. Every step, every movement is a negotiation with gravity, friction, and the weight of the world pressed against the body. Night worsens the ordeal. Rain falls, steadily, deepening puddles and saturating every layer of clothing. Boots become caked, legs weigh heavier with each step, and the cold bites deeper into muscles already exhausted from hours of maintaining posture and vigilance. Soldiers huddle where they can, pressed close together for warmth and stability, but even this offers little reprieve. Sleep is fleeting, interrupted by tremors in the earth, distant explosions, and the subtle but persistent pull of mud that seems to reach up with intent. The rats scuttle along the edges, undeterred, and sometimes vanish into the pools where mud is deepest, unafraid of the small human figures struggling to stay upright. By dawn, the trenches are transformed into a quagmire, waterlogged, uneven, and laden with the detritus of struggle. Every step forward is a fight. Every movement is resisted by the very earth that bears you. You lift your rifle, adjusting for balance, and realize fully that survival here is not determined solely by courage, reflexes, or even vigilance. The mud that swallows men whole is patient, impartial, and unyielding, claiming bodies, strength, and hope with equal measure. In the trenches of the Great War, life is measured by the ability to persist against forces both visible and invisible, and the mud teaches that endurance, above all, is the only hope of defying inevitability. The water comes again, relentless, patient, and cold, claiming the trenches inch by inch, pooling where earth and sandbags have shifted, soaking every surface it touches. It is not simply liquid, it is a presence, insidious and immovable, creeping into boots, gloves, and the folds of uniform, leaving men shivering and soaked to the bone. Every step through it is resistance itself, legs dragging through sludge that grips like hands, pulling, tugging, threatening to steal balance and dignity alike. It seeps into every crevice, finding weak seams in clothing, trickling into gloves, and making the simplest act of movement a negotiation with inevitability. You crouch in the trench, fingers pressed into soaked timber to steady yourself, boots sunk deep into the muck. Around you, soldiers shuffle carefully, hands clinging to walls or rifles, muscles straining against the pull of water that will not relent. Even small miscalculations a step too far, a shift of weight are punished, immediately, with boots sucked deeper, knees slipping, bodies wobbling. The water is indifferent, unyielding, patient, claiming what it can without malice, yet without mercy. Its persistence transforms the trench into a landscape of constant, unrelenting struggle, where survival is measured not in distance, skill, or courage, but in the ability to endure the unending resistance of the elements themselves. The smell of iron, mud, and decay is amplified by the water, pooling in shallow troughs and mixing with traces of blood and sweat. Every inhalation carries a reminder of mortality, of the fragility of human life in this environment. Soldiers move slowly, eyes scanning for hazards, watching the mud shift beneath feet, listening for the subtle squelch that betrays instability. Rats scuttle along the edges, unbothered by the cold or the constant presence of men, slipping across shallow pools and disappearing into the deeper water. Even these small creatures navigate the flooded trench with ease, a cruel contrast to the struggle of the soldiers, who must wade through it, conscious of every inch gained, every breath taken, every moment survived. Night exacerbates the terror. Rain falls steadily, joining the flooded trench in a ceaseless symphony of cold and wet. Water pools deepen, merging with mud to form treacherous stretches that conceal obstacles, discarded equipment, or worse. Soldiers huddle where they can, pressed into walls or against one another for warmth, shivering and exhausted, eyes darting in the dim lantern light. Every attempt at rest is haunted by the creeping cold, the weight of the water, and the knowledge that any movement may provoke catastrophe, boots slipping, rifles dropping, balance failing, and bodies claimed by the unforgiving trench. By dawn, the water has done its work. Trenches are rivers of sludge and mud, every movement resisted, every step uncertain. Soldiers rise slowly, limbs stiff and trembling, boots soaked, gloves caked with mud. You understand fully that survival in this environment is provisional, fragile, and contingent, not only on skill, vigilance, or courage, but on the ability to endure the constant, unyielding presence of water itself. In the trenches of the Great War, the water refuses comfort, teaching that even the simplest elements of life, movement, warmth, and stability, must be earned, negotiated, and defended against forces beyond human control. The gas comes next, creeping silently across the trenches like a predator moving through fog. It arrives not with a sound, not with a warning, but with a subtle, insidious presence that fills every hollow, every crevice, every corner of the mud-choked trenches. At first, it is almost imperceptible, a faint, acrid scent, a slight stinging at the back of the throat, but the moment it touches the lungs, the body reacts violently. Coughs erupt, eyes water, and the taste of metal invades the mouth, thick and bitter. Even the masks issued to soldiers offer only partial protection. The gas slips beneath, around, and through, filling the spaces that human ingenuity cannot defend. You crouch low, pressed against the wall of the trench, fingers gripping a rifle as the acrid air bites at every breath. Around you, comrades struggle, coughing, gagging, tears streaming down faces streaked with mud and sweat. Some stagger forward, heads bowed, eyes glassy, hands pressed to makeshift coverings over mouth and nose, trying desperately to stay upright, to breathe, to endure. Others collapse entirely, overcome by the invisible poison that moves faster than fear or thought. The gas is impartial, patient, and thorough, claiming bodies without ceremony, whispering in its own silent language that survival is fleeting and hope is fragile. The earth does nothing to protect you. Mud and water hold the fumes, allowing them to linger in low points, in pools that reflect dim lantern light, in corners where exhaustion already weighs heavily on the men. Boots sink, legs tremble, and even the simplest movement, shifting position, adjusting a rifle, leaning over a parapet, becomes fraught with danger. The body rebels instinctively, muscles convulsing as oxygen becomes tainted, mind clouded with dizziness and nausea. Survival is not about courage here. It is about endurance of the most intimate kind. The struggle to breathe, to move, to remain conscious while the world conspires silently around. And you. Night brings no relief. The gas thickens in the trench like smoke, curling along the walls, merging with the mist and fog to form a suffocating blanket that presses against skin and lungs alike. Every movement disturbs it. Every breath draws it deeper. Every exertion makes it worse. Soldiers shiver in cold and fear, their energy sapped, their resolve tested. The rats, ever present, avoid pockets of thickest air, their instinctive survival, a cruel reminder that human endurance is finite, fragile, and constantly challenged. Even sleep is impossible. Every shallow breath is an exercise in negotiation with the invisible, relentless predator that fills the trench. By dawn, the gas has not lifted. It lingers like a memory, an omnipresent threat, invisible yet undeniable. You understand fully that this is more than a weapon, it is a teacher, precise and unforgiving. It teaches that the air itself can betray, that life in these trenches is never safe, and that every breath is a fragile, earned act. In the Great War, the gas does not simply wound or kill. It reminds every soldier of the provisional nature of survival, of the impossibility of comfort, and of the constant, intimate battle against forces both seen and unseen. To endure is to breathe despite pain, to move despite fear, and to persist when even hope itself is choking. The endless watch comes next, a quiet, oppressive companion that does not rest, that does not pause, and that demands constant vigilance. In the trenches, there is no true reprieve, no moment entirely free from the weight of observation. Every soldier knows that eyes must sweep across mud, wire, and the distant horizon at all times, searching for movement, listening for the faintest whine of shells, the rustle of debris, the whisper of wind across barbed wire. The watch is unending, a cycle of anticipation, fear, and the faint hope that nothing will change before the next shift. Yet the watch is merciless. It punishes distraction, hesitation, and exhaustion alike. You crouch low, rifle at the ready, shoulders tense, eyes tracing the grey horizon where smoke curls into sky, and the faint glint of metal or mud can betray an enemy presence. Around you, comrades do the same, scanning, shifting, whispering minimal words, hands poised for movement, bodies coiled with readiness. Even the simplest lapse a glance away, a dropped rifle, a momentary slackening of attention can be fatal. The endless watch is both protector and tormentor, teaching that survival in these trenches is measured not in courage or valor, but in the ability to sustain vigilance across hours that stretch into a single, interminable moment. Mud and water amplify the strain. Every movement is resisted by the sticky, cold terrain. Each shift threatens balance. Each step threatens to collapse into puddles that hide debris, wire, or worse. Soldiers lean against sandbags or wooden planks, trying to stabilize themselves while keeping eyes and ears alert. Muscles ache from hours of holding posture, fingers cramp from tension, and the mind begins to fatigue despite itself. Yet the watch allows no rest. Even in the briefest pause, shadows twist, wind whispers, and the earth trembles under the distant roar of artillery. Vigilance must continue, or the consequences are immediate and absolute. Night deepens, the watch. Darkness conceals threats, magnifies noises, and stretches seconds into minutes and minutes into hours. Lanterns cast pale circles of light, revealing mud-slick walls and the occasional glint of wire, but most remains hidden, obscured, uncertain. Every rustle of cloth, every faint cough, every scuttling rat becomes a potential threat, a challenge to the attention of men already exhausted by cold, hunger, and fatigue. Sleep is impossible. Every breath, every twitch of a hand, every subtle movement must be assessed, judged, and responded to. The endless watch is as much psychological as physical, a constant reminder that the battlefield offers no mercy, no pause, no forgiveness. By dawn, soldiers are hollow-eyed, muscles trembling, minds stretched thin by the unyielding demand of observation. The trenches bear the marks of this watch. Footprints in mud, worn paths along the walls, trembling hands gripping rifles, and faces etched with fatigue and tension. You understand fully that survival is earned not only through courage or skill, but through the ability to maintain awareness, alertness, and readiness when every instinct and every body part longs for rest. In the trenches of the Great War, the endless watch is a teacher, a burden, and a constant companion, reminding every man that life is provisional, danger is omnipresent, and even the smallest lapse can be fatal. The barrage comes next, unceasing, relentless, a constant rhythm that presses against the mind, the body, and the very earth itself. It begins as distant thunder, the dull rumble of artillery far beyond sight, and grows steadily louder, sharper, until it vibrates through the trench walls, through boots, through bone, and into the marrow of every soldier. Each explosion sends tremors through mud and timber, shaking sandbags, splintering planks, and flinging debris into the air. The sound is a chorus of destruction, a ceaseless roar that drowns thoughts, erases distinction between night and day, and makes every breath an effort against the oppressive cadence of war. You crouch low, pressing fingers into the mud to anchor yourself, feeling every vibration pulse through shoulders, spine, and knees. Around you, comrades lean against walls, pressed low, hands gripping rifles, and faces contorted with exhaustion and concentration. Even the experienced soldiers flinch at each explosion, muscles coiling instinctively, hearts racing with anticipation of what may follow. There is no pause, no rhythm that can be anticipated, only the barrage itself, a reminder that survival is provisional and measured in reflexes, instinct, and the smallest fraction of luck. Mud and water amplify the brutality. Each shell loosens the trench walls, churns the mud into treacherous pools, and adds weight to every step. Boots slip, gloves lose grip, rifles slide in hands slick with mud, and every movement becomes a negotiation with the terrain, as well as the threat from above. The men flinch with every tremor, reacting to the vibrations as much as to the sight of exploding earth. The barrage teaches patience, endurance, and fear, demonstrating that in these trenches, danger is omnipresent, inevitable, and implacable. Survival is no longer measured in distance or courage alone, but in the ability to persist under continuous, unrelenting assault. Night amplifies the horror. In the darkness, the sound is omnipresent, filling every space, masking footsteps, whispers, and distant cries. Lanterns flicker weakly against the thickening mist, illuminating mud and water but leaving much hidden, uncertain, and terrifying. Rats scuttle across uneven floors, undeterred by explosions, their small, confident movements, a cruel contrast to the human struggle. Even sleep is impossible. When men close their eyes for a moment, the memory of sound and vibration lingers, coiling through the body, tightening muscles, and keeping reflexes on edge. The barrage becomes both teacher and tormentor, showing the futility of exhaustion and the impossibility of escape from relentless danger. By dawn, the trench bears the scars of the night's onslaught: mud churned into rivers, sandbags split, planks shattered, equipment displaced, and bodies marked by the randomness of violence. Soldiers rise cautiously, limbs stiff, muscles trembling, senses frayed, and hearts heavy with fatigue. The barrage has left no one untouched, teaching that in the trenches of the Great War, life is fragile, provisional, and constantly challenged. Every step forward, every breath taken, and every heartbeat is measured against forces that never cease, that never pause, and that never forgive. Survival is endurance itself, and the barrage that never ends is its most unrelenting tutor. The letters never sent come next, fragile fragments of a world that exists just beyond the trenches, carried on the hope of men who write hurriedly by candlelight or by the dim glow of lanterns before dawn. They are folded, sometimes damp from the constant moisture in the dugouts, ink smeared from trembling fingers, or the occasional accidental splash of mud. These letters are meant to carry messages of love, of longing, of reassurance from the men who remain behind, or from soldiers themselves hoping to convey that they are alive, that they endure despite the chaos. Yet for every letter written, many never leave the trench, never make it to the distant town, the farmhouse, or the quiet street from which it was imagined. They rot quietly in packs, in pockets, or in crates, soaking in water and mud, a testimony to interrupted connection. You crouch in the trench, careful to keep your own folded notes dry, fingers pressed against paper, already damp from rain or sweat. Around you, comrades, hunch beside piles of letters, reading scraps that have survived moisture, torn envelopes, or the scraping of rats. Some are able to send theirs, trusting a runner or a distant post, but most remain trapped, their words and sentiments captured in the unforgiving embrace of the battlefield. The letters never sent are more than paper. They are hope deferred, messages swallowed by circumstance, reminders that survival in the trenches is never just a matter of physical endurance, but also of maintaining a tenuous connection to the humanity that exists beyond mud, wire, and shellfire. Night magnifies their futility. Rain drifts steadily into the trenches, seeping through walls, softening paper, smudging ink, and rendering words unreadable. Soldiers attempt to preserve them, stacking them carefully, or pressing them to their chests for warmth and protection. But even careful handling is often insufficient. Mud and water invade every fold, rats nibble on corners, and the constant movement of men in cramped, crowded spaces tears at the fragile bundles. The letters rot slowly, silently, unnoticed until they are beyond recovery, their messages lost to entropy, their sentiment absorbed into the pervasive despair of the trenches. The psychological toll is immense. Letters that were meant to reassure now frustrate, reminding men of the distance between themselves and home, between life and death, between hope and reality. They become a mirror of fragility, reflecting the impossibility of controlling events in the trenches. Even those who survive the night cannot claim victory over the letter's disappearance. They linger in the memory, in pockets, in crates that will be overturned or abandoned. Ghostly reminders that effort and intention are no guarantees in a world ruled by mud, water, artillery, and chance. By dawn, the letters never sent are softened, stained, curled, and largely unreadable, absorbed into the mud and debris like every other trace of life in the trenches. They are more than paper, they are a lesson. They teach that survival is provisional, that effort is often futile, and that even hope is fragile, temporary, and often denied. In the trenches of the Great War, these letters, like men themselves, are claimed not by the enemy, but by circumstance, environment, and inevitability. They rot quietly, a testament to interrupted connection, and a haunting reminder that in this world, survival is measured not only by the body, but by the endurance of the human spirit against forces that will not pause, relent, or forgive. The hunger comes next, quiet at first, almost polite in its approach, but relentless in its persistence. It creeps into the body as a hollow gnawing in the stomach, a faint ache that can be ignored briefly, while mud, water, and fear demand attention. Then it grows sharper, spreading through muscles, making legs feel heavier, fingers clumsier, and the mind sluggish with every passing hour. Hunger in the trenches is not simply the absence of food. It is a force, patient and insistent, magnifying exhaustion, amplifying fear, and gnawing at the edges of willpower with the persistence of time itself. You crouch low, trying to focus on the task at hand, fingers stiff and numb, rifle pressed against your chest, but your stomach twists and tightens, a constant reminder of the body's needs. Around you, soldiers shift uneasily, trading glances, whispering about rations that have dwindled or were never enough, chewing hard biscuits, ration tins, or scraps of meat in silence. The taste is bland, cold, and often damp from the rain, but it is all that keeps the body moving. Hunger sharpens every sensation. The smell of iron, mud, smoke, and decay is more intense. Every drop of water feels insufficient, and every movement requires careful calculation to conserve energy. Even minor exertion becomes a negotiation with the hollow ache inside, a reminder that survival is not merely about skill, courage, or vigilance, but about endurance of the body's most basic demands. Night worsens the torment. Cold and damp amplify the gnawing ache, while wet mud and water make it nearly impossible to conserve heat or energy. Soldiers lie pressed against walls or against one another, trying to shield what little warmth remains. Some attempt to eat again, gnawing at rationed biscuits or pieces of meat that have gone cold in pockets or crates. But hunger is insatiable, relentless, and unforgiving. The rats, bold and patient, exploit the scarcity of human sustenance, scavenging scraps left behind, leaving nothing to appease the ache that grows with every hour. Hunger teaches endurance in its most intimate, inescapable form, forcing every man to confront the fragility of strength and the limits of will. By dawn, the hunger has left its mark. Faces are drawn, eyes glassy, movements sluggish, muscles trembling under the constant assault of exhaustion and need. You lift your rifle, careful with every motion, feeling the weight of weakness in every step, every breath, every heartbeat. It is a teacher, merciless and absolute. Survival is provisional, measured not only by courage, vigilance, or skill, but by the endurance of the body against the gnawing insistence of deprivation. In the trenches of the Great War, hunger is omnipresent, patient, and unforgiving. It feeds not only on the body but on the mind, shaping every action, every calculation, every desperate measure taken to endure. To survive here is to persist despite gnawing emptiness, to move forward despite weakness, and to hold life itself against a world determined to strip it away. The silence comes next, but it is not peace. It is a heavy, suffocating presence that fills the trenches, pressing against walls, mud, and bodies alike. After hours of artillery, explosions, shellfire, and screams, there are moments when the world pauses, when the chaos recedes just enough for the emptiness to become palpable. In these moments, the absence of sound is louder than any roar, sharper than any whistle of a shell. It presses into the chest, settling into the bones, echoing in every joint and muscle, whispering that death is never far, and that the living are temporary tenants in a world that spares no one. You crouch low, knees pressed into the cold, wet mud, rifle clutched tightly, muscles coiled, senses straining. Around you, soldiers lie or huddle, listening as the silence thickens and stretches, testing patience, endurance, and resolve. Some whisper quiet prayers, some mutter fragments of memory or longing, but every sound is immediately swallowed by the weight of nothingness. It is a deceptive quiet. It promises rest, but delivers anxiety, a suffocating awareness of vulnerability and the impossibility of certainty. In the trenches, silence is not comfort, it is a reminder, constant and intimate, that life is provisional and that death waits for even the smallest misstep. The mud, water, and persistent chill heighten its effect. Every shiver, every tremor of fatigue, every rustle of clothing or movement becomes magnified in the hush. Rats move stealthily along the edges, their small claws clicking faintly in the shadows, and even this minor intrusion seems amplified, almost menacing, against the oppressive stillness. The mind searches for patterns, for meaning, for noise to anchor thought, but the silence offers none. It is patient, indifferent, omnipresent. It does not rush. It does not threaten actively, but it dominates the senses more completely than any attack, more thoroughly than any shell. Night stretches the silence further, thickening it like a shroud. Lanterns cast dim, quivering light, revealing mud, water, wire, and the occasional glint of a boot or rifle. Shadows twist unnaturally, and every sound, no matter how small, pierces the quiet with startling clarity. Soldiers shift uneasily, muscles tensing in anticipation of threats that may never arrive. Sleep is fragile, if it comes at all, haunted by imagined explosions, cries, and tremors. The silence becomes a teacher, one that instructs in the impossibility of certainty, the futility of comfort, and the inescapable presence of danger. By dawn, the silence has done its work. Limbs are stiff, eyes strained, minds frayed, and hearts heavy. You rise cautiously, boots sinking into mud, muscles quivering, aware that the quiet has revealed truths louder than any battle cry. Survival is provisional, vigilance must never cease, and the world will not pause for fatigue, fear, or despair. In the trenches of the Great War, the silence screams, teaching that even absence is filled with lessons, and that enduring the emptiness is as crucial as surviving the bullets, shells, mud, and wire that dominate life and death alike. Deliberate, measured against the treacherous terrain, the lingering gas, the mud, the water, and the ever-present threat of enemy fire. The dawn changes nothing. It simply illuminates the impossibility of escape, the futility of hope deferred, and the fragile hold that life maintains in these trenches. The smells of iron, blood, smoke, and decay cling to the air, intensified by the cold, damp morning. Every inhalation is a reminder of mortality, every breath a negotiation with the environment that has claimed so many before. Rats scuttle along the edges, unbothered by the chaos and destruction, while soldiers shuffle through mud, water, and debris, adjusting rifles and gear with trembling hands. The cold presses into bones already weary from exhaustion. Every step, a calculated act of endurance against fatigue, fear, and the unyielding pull of gravity. The night's lessons are evident in every tremor, every shiver, every strained breath. Mud has claimed boots, water has soaked uniforms, gas has burned lungs, rats have feasted on scraps, shells have shredded earth, and the silence has pressed into every nerve. Letters remain damp, smeared, or lost. Hunger gnaws at bellies, and the human body has betrayed in fever, exhaustion, and trembling. Every man who remains is a testament to endurance, but survival is partial, provisional, and contingent on factors beyond control. The dawn exposes these truths fully. The trenches of the Great War do not reward valor, effort, or courage alone. They demand patience, calculation, and endurance against forces seen and unseen. By mid-morning, soldiers begin to move along the trenches, cautious, deliberate, aware that each step, each breath, each heartbeat is temporary, provisional, and earned only through persistence. You rise slowly, boots heavy with mud, rifle clutched tightly, muscles trembling from fatigue, and realize that survival here is measured in inches and seconds, not glory. The dawn brings no triumph, no reassurance, only the unyielding truth that the world conspires against life in the trenches, that danger is omnipresent, and that each day lived is a defiance against the impossible. And as the weak light spreads across the battlefield, you understand fully. In these trenches, survival is not certain, hope is fragile, and life itself is a precarious, fleeting victory over the relentless machinery of war. This is the end, and the lesson is clear. The trenches claim everything they can, sparing only those who endure, step by step, breath by breath, in a world that spares none.